I'm here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens. Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Okay. First item is council comments. If I can just say welcome back to everybody. We've been off for 6 weeks. We're now back from our summer break. And I just have a couple quick things to mention. I want to make sure that everybody remembers that the Folk Festival is coming up this Sunday, September 12th, from 11 to 6 at the Tacoma Park Middle School. And everybody always has a real good time there, and I hope the weather is something approaching what we've had this past weekend, because then it'll be even better. Also, the Street Festival is Sunday, October 3rd, from 10 to 5 in Old Town. And I also just wanted to mention that I was appointed to and attended meetings of the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee, and we had our meetings in late August and early September discussing legislative requests from municipalities across the state, and wanted to let you know that what we came up with as our recommendation for the legislative conference, which is the end of October in Annapolis, is 2 items. The first one being the trying to get back the highway user revenues and police aid, with a particular emphasis on the highway user revenues. And the second one is an amalgam of a request from us and from Rockville, Gaithersburg, Frederick, to basically come up with other revenue sources and to make that a multi-year strategy and a multi-revenue source strategy, so that one of the items that we submitted that was attempting to be kind of a catch-all for all of the various revenue issues at the state is part of what has been accepted by the committee and will be recommended at that conference. So just wanted to let you know that we were kind of in line with the thinking of the statewide group in terms of what the emphasis should be in Annapolis next year. Are there other council comments? Councilmember Robinson.
Well, it was grand being away for 6 weeks, but I couldn't wait to get back. Here we all are. I'm going to start by talking about a concert between the Folk Festival and the Street Festival, and it's part of the We Are Tacoma series here in this chamber. There's a group. There will be 4 musicians, and they go under the name of Oreca TX, and it's kind of an odd name, but they're Basque musicians. They're bringing a special instrument here, a series of special instruments, and I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that people will come. It's free of charge. It's part of the We Are Tacoma series. That's a cultural outreach program from the city. I'm particularly interested because for the last year or so, I've been exploring my Basque heritage. My grandfather was Basque, and you might recall that I wore a beret here one night. Not only to keep the glare out of my eyes, but it was also to honor my grandfather. The language is very difficult. I'd count to 10 for you, but I don't want to waste everybody's time. I did, though, have the pleasure of going out to Idaho this summer during my vacation, and was lucky enough to spend half an hour with the Boise mayor. I was in Boise because there was a very large Basque cultural festival there. About 25,000 Basques showed up to party in the streets and to have sports events. Their sports events are all kind of very pragmatic and practical, based on lifting wagons and chopping wood, that sort of thing. I learned a good deal from the Boise mayor. It's a strong mayor, strong council city, which means that the mayor runs the city. The council has to agree on every department head. That's a very quick sketch of how the city is managed, but I thought that was of some interest. And the western part of the United States is very spectacular. If you go there, you'll see that. I thought a good deal about the park renaming that the neighborhood around what's known as the Tacoma Urban Park is pursuing with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. I realized that it was somewhat difficult to agree on this body about support for that. I do also agree that it's a worthwhile endeavor to really look at what we name in the city and have a good discussion about that, and our mayor has put that idea. I think we'll hear that idea is put on our agenda at some point in the not-too-distant future. Chief, I see that you're here, and I'm just going to mention on one other thing. I'm going back to the 410 East-West Highway, Route 410, New Hampshire Avenue intersection. Colleen, that's in your ward. I've gone through there. I go through there almost every day, and I noticed two things about it. One is that if you're going eastbound, the configuration of the lanes is just what people are asking for going westbound. That's the first thing. And the second is that all westbound traffic stops while eastbound traffic has a full green left, or full green left and straight arrows. And then when the eastbound traffic stops completely, the westbound traffic has full green left and green arrows for the entirety of its cycle. And I think that's what is irritating people who feel that they're not allowed or to turn left or are getting ticketed because there's not a specific sign, as you noted, going that direction. I think that the intersection is set up in its timing, and everything about it is set up to allow for left turns from the middle lane. And I know that we had talked about going to the State Highway Administration to ask for a review based on what I've seen there. It might be just that they treat the the westbound traffic the same way they're treating the eastbound traffic. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Nobody else? Okay. I had an opportunity over the past few weeks to talk to several people in my ward and around the city, actually, but particularly in my ward. And two issues have come up repeatedly, and I know that one of them we'll deal with, which is the tree ordinance. Looking forward to taking the opportunity to see if we can't do some revisions of the tree ordinance. I heard a lot of really good suggestions. I'm sure they'll come up when we have that discussion. The other issue I heard a lot about is traffic, because my ward will be affected by the closing of Park Valley and the rerouting that will occur on Ritchie and Mississippi and so on. And there's lots of specific things about that, which I don't need to talk about, but I would like to work with the city manager or the mayor on maybe we can work out some strategies to have a better relationship with the county on resolving these issues, on addressing them, on getting notified about them. There's some possibilities for changing the way the notification works. Currently, it's only people who are benefit from the traffic changes, not the people who are, a block or two away, who will be also very affected by it. And I believe it's Councilmember Irvin's committee that deals with it. So I think I'd like to spend a little time chatting over the next little while about how we can work on that a little bit, make it a little bit more friendly to those people. Anyway, I have some ideas for it. We'll talk.
Okay. Councilmember Clay.
Let's see. So I have a kind of a laundry list, and I'll just kind of go through them. Over the break, a sinkhole has opened up on Larch Avenue, where Hayward comes into Larch. There's two storm drains there at that corner house. So there's 4, maybe there's 6. But in any case, there's 2 at the corner house where 812 Hayward wraps around the side of Larch Avenue. And there's a large Tacoma Park style storm drain, which looks to me like just a big metal box with some bricks around it, and probably put in 110 years ago. And there's a sinkhole that's developed around it. And I called Public Works, and they responded immediately and came and put some covers over it. But That's been, I don't know, it's been at least 3 weeks. And haven't really heard anything back about what's going to happen with it. And every time it rains, the sinkhole's getting bigger. So I don't know if we should bring a cement truck in and pour some cement in it in the time being, or some asphalt, or set a temporary building on top of it or something. But we should do something before some child or pet falls into the abyss. Ethan Allen, looking forward to the discussion tonight about Ethan Allen Avenue, because it continues to deteriorate and cause significant damage to vehicles and people's personal well-being. I want to say about Councilmember Robinson's comments about 410 and New Hampshire Avenue. I have no objection to asking the state to study the intersection and any of the, I don't have any objection to any of the ideas proposed. I initially said I wanted to enforce the law as it stands, and I continue to believe we should enforce the law and the signage and what the current traffic is, but I would support an evaluation, absolutely. I've had continuing requests from people in the Forest Park area around code enforcement issues. Those are a repeat of the same requests from 2 months ago. So over the holiday period, same kinds of things, clotheslines, and there's questions about poison ivy and invasive plants and all sorts of things, sort of in the area around Prince George's and Belford Place and Belford Drive and Conway, in that area. I wanted to remind people to enjoy the nice new local stores that we have. I'm painting a bedroom in my house that I'm moving into shortly, and found some very nice low VOC paints at the new Ace hardware store. Found lots of good canning goods at the hardware store, all the little things that I need for my house, and would encourage people to get accustomed to going there. I've been there a couple times when people have been maybe not as Tacoma Park friendly as I would like them to be to the folks there, and I think that, if you go to the Ace Hardware store and you're looking for a 50-pound bag of something and they have two 25-pound bags of something, you maybe shouldn't threaten to go to the other chain down the street, but graciously accept that it's easier to carry a 25-pound bag of something, and that supporting them lets you have a local hardware store. And the folks in there have been so helpful and friendly about every little thing that we have. I think we tried 8 different tester colors of paint for our new room before we settled on one. And they graciously made all of them for us and have done all kinds of great things. And they even have silly bands in a variety of different Princess, Mickey Mouse, Scooby-Doo, and even the Flintstones characters for your kids. So I think they try real hard to do things that folks like. And the holidays are coming up. Went shopping in Polly Sue's today. I had brunch for the first time at the Middle Eastern cuisine place, which I had never done before. I know, it was really good.
It's very good.
I'm going to go more often. And had dinner at Mark's tonight. So I want to encourage people to keep supporting the local businesses and get to know the businesses on the periphery of the city as well. And sometimes they don't have every little thing that you want, but you need to continue to support the local community. I continue to buy all of our birthday, and I think we buy everything except all of our Christmas gifts at Now and Then, or what's the name of the shop that's right next to my kids go into? The Magic Carpet.
Yes.
Love to get, and the bead shop. Lots of things that we get there. There's lots of options. That's my plug for local business for the month. Trees. I've had some constituents who have expressed some reservations about calling and inquiring of our tree arborist because they've heard that he's scary. I'll tell people that the arborist is not scary, and encourage people to work with the arborist. And I think I've had more than one inquiry around this. Nice neighbors who, want to file a permit or something and are really concerned that something they've done in the past or some small thing is going to cause them to get a $1,000 fine, and reassure them. And it just tells me that we need to do some more outreach and education around this, and maybe like we have Touch a Truck Day, we should have Meet the Arborist Day, people can meet the arborist, and get to know the arborist some, and ask the arborist questions in a safer environment. I don't know. It's, people shouldn't be afraid of the arborist, and I feel bad that this has happened. I've been on lots of travel lately. I've been on a lot of travel for work, and I did take a week's vacation down to Florida to support a community, support the state that's been impacted by an oil spill. And had a great time, but I haven't been able to respond to email very quickly, and I don't always put that out because, just for safety reasons, I don't advertise to people when I'm going to be out of town for a week. So if I don't respond to you, it's likely that I've been out of town. I have some more travel coming up. So just want to remind people that I will get back to you. And if you don't get an answer right away, you can always email the city manager or the mayor. The mayor takes constituent questions from Ward 2. Let's see.
Do you have his phone number?
I don't give out his phone number, but his contact information is posted on the city website. There's 3 traffic things. We're still having problems with people going backwards through the Lincoln Elm traffic circle. Haven't really gotten what I think is a reasonable response about how we're going to address that issue. When it was first installed, and I expressed some concerns about the part that allows them to go backwards through the traffic circle, or they're not going backwards, they're going the wrong direction through the traffic circle. We talked about if it didn't work out, we would push the bump outs out a little bit, we would elevate the little split dividers and do some things, and none of that has happened, and we really need to do something about that. And we still have Long Branch Sligo traffic calming issues on the table, including tightening up the intersection at Sligo Creek Parkway where it meets Flower Avenue to discourage people from using that as sort of a freeway on-ramp into the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood. I think lots of the people there agreed that putting a raised crosswalk at the intersection would help, and some other ideas that they have had that they actually had some pretty widespread agreement on in the community. And Auburn and Devonshire Avenue has been asking for traffic calming meetings, and I think there's a standing request from them to meet with someone from the planning department to discuss what approaches they might take following on the meeting that they had over a year ago with the police chief, where he made that recommendation and said that that would be the next step to follow. And so they're still waiting for a response from the planning department on that. And last comment is I saw that the recreation department has a new youth council, which I didn't know anything about and was surprised to see. So that is certainly going to maybe impact our conversation about what the council might do around youth councils or youth activities, and maybe it would be good for somebody to come and tell us about that, since we're about to have that conversation. The first I saw of it was in the recreation brochure. And welcome to the fall, everybody.
No, it's still summer.
Labor Day is the unofficial end of summer. At least that's what I told my children.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to be back, and good to see my colleagues here on the council. I see that in the month we've been off, there's really a lot of changes going on in Ward 4. We have the redevelopment of the building at the corner of Ritchie and Maple Avenue that Montgomery Housing Partnership is doing. It's doing a fantastic job. I really like the way they've come in and started with an almost clean slate, it looks like, and really attacked it with a whole new perspective. And I'm optimistic about the way that project's going to turn out. And I was very pleased to hear that when that's done, they're planning to do major renovations at the Edinburgh Apartments right across the street from the municipal building here. And again, that's very exciting to see this kind of work going on in Ward 4. At the same time, I was very disappointed that the Maple Market has closed, the convenience store that has served the local neighborhood for so many years. I know it's a real hardship on the people. We pride ourselves in Ward 4 with our low percentage of car ownership. and high percentage of residents who use public transportation. And so it is an exceptional hardship not to have a convenience store that's within easy walking distance of people's homes. And then it's compounded by the fact that many of the residents of Ward 4 are on very limited incomes, and so to get public transportation to take them to the Giant or 7-Eleven to get a gallon of milk or some other food that they would normally buy at the convenience store is sometimes puts it out of the question, because a taxi bill could put the price to be over the top. So if you forget something when you go for groceries, you may have to do without until the next time you go. But I was surprised in talking with the business operator before he closed the door for the last day that he was telling me that the property manager had given them a rent increase that was significant. It was not double the rent, but it was nearly double. And he said that the increase in rent was difficult, but it was compounded by requests that were additional requests that were made by the property manager that the interior of the store needed to be remodeled and new flooring put down, and that also the product line within the store had to be changed. And I was surprised to hear that the property manager indicated to the store owner that the last two requests were made by the city. And so I would just like to check and see if we did have conversations with the property manager about the changing the interior of the store or with the product line. And I'm not saying that, this story came downhill through different people, so I'm not saying that I have an accurate representation. That's why I want to come back to you, Barb, to see if we could get a better appreciation of what did happen.
I'm not aware of any conversations, Councilmember Siemens, but I'll follow up with the planning staff tomorrow.
I appreciate that, and we can talk offline about the details about that. Thank you. And that's all.
Councilmember Wright?
Thanks. It's great to be back here. Good to see all my council colleagues. Traveled around a bit this summer, and it was great. Good to have some time off, but happy to be back. Number of items. First, wanted to make sure people know that early voting in the county and state election is going on now. It goes through until Friday the 9th, and the closest voting location is at the Silver Spring Civic Center, which is the new building right on Fenton, where the AstroTurf space used to be in downtown Silver Spring. I'm going to go and do my early voting tomorrow evening, since I won't be here on election day the 14th. Second item, I just wanted to check to see if we've had any progress on the large buses on Maple. I know the last report that Suzanne and I got was that they thought that in September, that was from Valerie Urban's office, that they thought in September the large buses would be off Maple, but I haven't seen that to be the case, so if we could check in with the appropriate people at Ride On in Valerie's office, that would be great.
There's as someone who rides that bus, there's more of a mix now. That is, there are more of the smaller buses running some of the time, in addition to the large buses that run.
Yeah, they had been doing like 50-50, but maybe is it now better than 50-50?
Yeah, I think it's a little better than 50-50. I don't know exactly what the proportion is, because I don't watch them go by. I get on them.
You have the sample size of getting on randomly.
I do, right. And it is random, yes.
The second thing I wanted to inquire about is there are signs on each end of Maple Avenue which basically say trucks can't go on the street. And the size of the vehicles on Maple Avenue that are not cars, I'm not talking about like vans or pickup trucks, but I saw like a huge tour bus going down the other day. I've seen close to, I don't know quite if they're 18-wheelers, but maybe the truck right below the size of 18-wheelers going down Maple. And with the speed bumps on that street, you can imagine the volume of noise that happens when one of those things hits the speed bump. So I don't know if I know there's been some debate about whether we can enforce things like that. Can we enforce or no? we cannot enforce. So we have the sign up, but we can't enforce it. The chief's coming to the microphone.
I got asked that about 4 years ago, and I checked on it. They put the signs up, but they have no legality. There's nothing that backs them up. There's no city ordinance, and there's definitely nothing from the county or the state.
So if we passed a city ordinance, though, then that would be enforceable, or is there some state law that supersedes the county law?
I'm not too sure on that one. I think we'd have to talk to our lawyer on that. I don't think that you can. You may be able to put up a weight limit, because there is weight limits for trucks, but in a residential area probably. But we'd have to do some research on it before we could do anything like that.
So could we check with Sue, just because I feel like if we have the signs up, we should either figure out having the appropriate ordinance so we can enforce it or not, because right now it's another sign, and there's a lot of signs up around the city, as we all know, and it's not being enforced, and I don't think it's a case where the sign's effective in stopping the trucks. Next is, I'm very excited about the Ethan Allen conversation, like Councilmember Clay. I'm glad to see that the chief is here. I assume since he's here and we have this report on burglaries, we're going to get an update. I've gotten, although my neighborhood hasn't been hit as hard as, or my ward hasn't been hit as hard as some of the other wards, this is very much on people's minds, the number of burglaries that have been occurring. Had a question related to storm drain capacity, and this is maybe related to Councilmember Clay's item, in that I'm curious if our storm drains are required to meet a certain level of storm. Usually, these things, like we know from this building, are required to meet 10-year storms or 100-year storms. And I'm curious if we have requirements around it, either that is codified in the code or just a factor that we've done in our storm drain planning. And I asked that because I'm a little concerned. There was one of these very intense storms we've had recently in Boston Avenue, totally flooded. And I'm wondering if, as any reputable scientist would tell you who studies climate change, that climate change is going to cause more severe weather, regardless of what we do at this point. And concerned maybe that as these more intense weather events, I know the mayor doesn't always like that word, occur, that that the storm drain system might not be quite up to handling the increased volume of rain, particularly if they're set up to be a 10-year storm, and a 10-year storm is no longer a 10-year storm, but a 5-year storm. So if there's any information that Darrell have, that would be very helpful. I have a comment on something in the Tacoma Park newsletter. It was a story reported on the condo project being revived at the Eco Park site. And I'm all for us reporting on development activities that occur within the city. And I know it's a city newsletter, so it doesn't probably meet the same standard as the Washington Post or the New York Times in terms of fact-checking and investigative journalism. But I was very surprised just by the story. Basically, the person talked to the developer, and the developer has been actually notorious for quoting dates on when the project is going to get off the ground. The story doesn't mention anything about the fact that Chevron, one of the two companies that operated a gas station there, has still not agreed to do their abatement to the fuel tanks and any oil that's leaked out of those fuel tanks. And the other company that did that, it was a multi-week process to remove the oil tanks. And there's still, because we talked to one developer that was in play at a point, there's still a whole bunch of excavation that has to happen that, in my understanding, is very slow, because it's basically bucket load by bucket load, where an inspector is telling the excavator what has to happen to the dirt, whether it can go into a normal dirt pile or has to go be baked to get the oil out of it. So I was just very surprised that we would have a reporting on that where none of the other kind of credible sources, Ross Grigsby, the ANC members on the other side of the line in D.C. who are very knowledgeable about this, none of those people were talked to or interviewed or asked for their perspective. And now we have a story out there that basically says there's going to be a groundbreaking in October, which is right around the corner, and I'm very suspect of that, and I think we might look like we have egg on our face when that doesn't happen. I also I'm way behind in my email based on when I traveled away this summer for 2 weeks. I basically didn't do email. Really tried to take time off for the most part. 2 more items, and then I'll be done. One is curious if we can get an update on the Tacoma Piney Branch Park project. I know that's been talked about. It's still in the CIP. I think everybody in the city, but neighbors in particular that are in close proximity to the park, are excited to have that project start and get completed. And there was talk that it would start this fall. I think it might be as much as a 1.5 to 2 year project. And I think everyone else in the city will be excited to have a renovated park. If anyone's seen the plans, it's great, and includes a skate park, which is something that people have been requesting. And then lastly, I just am curious about an update on the website. I know we have have a plan to redo the website and use a different software package, and I know there's some staff to be hired, but every time I click on, for example, the map link, which it used to be a great link because it took you to a variety of different maps for the city and referred you to the, I think, part of the library page. Now, I know we broke all the links to the library because there was some information that wasn't up to date, like that George Bush was still the president. But again, he's... Wake up, Rip Van Winkle. That the website continues to be, at least to me, a bit of an embarrassment, and I know the city staff, it's not up to their standards either, and it has the potential to be a great resource for the city.
Yeah, I can just speak to that briefly. A new site is in development. It's very close. One of the persons that we're working with as a consultant had a family emergency, so we're slowed down a couple weeks. But that should be up pretty soon, and I'll try to get you a good timetable within about a week when I hear back from him.
I'd love to see a beta version of that.
Yeah, and we've got some
Great.
aspects of that. I do want to take this opportunity, though, to mention that we have a new media specialist in the city, Craig Terrell, and he's been on board 3 weeks. He's jumping right into the social media aspects of our communication efforts. He's got a Twitter and Facebook out for our city. He's going to be promoting it at the Folk Festival coming up. We are encouraging everybody to sign on and give him ideas about the kind of information we want to share. He is working with the website developer, and as I said, as soon as we have an upcoming meeting, we are just trying to schedule around this guy's family situation, and we should be able to report back to you quite soon. We're real excited about it. We also are ready to move on, so I can assure you we're moving it as quickly as possible. And I think that if you have an opportunity to meet Craig, you'll be thrilled that he's planning on moving things very quickly for us all.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Schultz.
I want to talk about several things here, and I'll try and keep it as quick as I can because I'm the last one to speak on comments. First thing is to comment on the Crossroads Farmers Market. As everybody should know by now, I hope, that the Crossroads Farmers Market meets every Wednesday afternoon from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And I've been up there most Wednesdays this summer, and each week the volume of customers has grown to the point where I was last up there, by the time I got up there about 6 o'clock this past Wednesday, most of the fruits and vegetables were sold out. And I've been told that was happening in previous weeks as well. So that market is doing very well, and I encourage people to go up there and try it. It's one of the nice things about it is that it is an evening market, and so that it makes it convenient for people who can't otherwise get to the farmers market down on Laurel Avenue. I wanted to ask a question, and that is that I know that the Department of Public Works has or is in the process of acquiring a new street sweeping vehicle, and I'm wondering where that stands, because I've noticed the last few Fridays, which normally comes into my ward, I haven't seen any sign of it, and streets need a little sweeping. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. There is an ordinance scheduled for September 27th for the council to approve the purchase of a new sweeper.
Okay. Is the street sweeping something that's on hold for a while, or has it just been back?
It was on my street today, so it's running.
Okay. Well, I want to take the time here just to thank the Department of Public Works staff, because they've been working very closely with me over the last 3 or 4 weeks with a redesign of 2 traffic circles on Wildwood Drive that had been in the planning for, getting on to close to 2 years now. Construction started on it. Engineering started on it probably in April and May, and construction started on it in June. But the community wasn't particularly satisfied with the preliminary. They aren't finished, but as far as they got, our community was unhappy with the way it was going to look. I expressed those concerns to the Department of Public Works, the director, Daryl Braithwaite. She graciously agreed to take a second look at the engineering possibilities about what the budget might allow, and so forth, a lot of criteria that have to be met. It's my experience that traffic circles are the kind of traffic calming device that readily comes to mind as a good way to calm traffic, and I think it is. But what the city's Department of Public Works director is telling me, that each location for a circle is unique in the city, that the city is learning about traffic circles as it goes. It's made so the engineering has been sometimes not the greatest by their own admission, and that sometimes it's a difficult process to get it to work the way it needs to work from a functionality point of view, a safety point of view, an engineering point of view, an aesthetic viewpoint, and also within the budget. I just wanted to thank the Department of Public Works for their work on trying to come up with a better solution, which in my opinion they have done. And I also wanted to comment, I didn't realize that the Department of Recreation had set up a youth council, because I was all getting fired up to sit down, particularly with Councilmember Clay, to discuss about what sort of a youth organization we could recommend. But now that the department has already undertaken or initiated it, then we will work with that and see what we can do.
It's not the same thing.
Well, that's what I need to understand. I don't know what it is or what it isn't, and I'm not asking any questions right now. There'll be time for that. But it's something I think holds lots of potential, if done right, to address a number of issues in the city. I'll leave it at that. The other thing is that one of my concerns from this past year has been and will continue to be in this coming year of work of the City Council is the issue of plastic bags in the city. Last year I was advised during the legislative session in Annapolis that the state was working on legislation that would address it. That didn't happen for whatever reason. I noticed this summer that a referendum in California on prohibiting plastic bags at the state level was defeated. And while this is one of these things that I think is a good idea, and I think most people would automatically agree, there are reasons that there might be opposition to it. And I'd like to, this year, try to spend some time figuring out what we might be able to do at the local level, either singularly as a city of Tacoma Park or in conjunction with some of our nearby adjacent municipalities, to see if we can't do something in concert together to sort of establish a beachhead on this thing. And if we can't do anything else, will embarrass the Maryland legislature into doing something about it. Oh, and also, I'm looking forward to the discussion on street trees, or on the tree ordinance. That's coming up, work session on September 27th, council meeting. I've had a number of complaints and concerns and questions from citizens in my ward who've also offered some, I think, valuable suggestions. So I'm looking forward to that, and I want anybody who's got some ideas to bring them to me, certainly from my ward, and I'd be happy to listen and hear them out so that we can get as many ideas on the table as possible. So finally, let me just say I glad to be back. I was greatly looking forward to this break. It was a great break, and I'm glad. I've been looking forward now to coming back and getting started. It's just like going back to school.
Yeah.
And just a quick comment on your referencing the plastic bag legislation. That was one of our recommendations to the Municipal League Legislative Committee for support this year. It did not make the cut, but I would say I was gratified by the support of a number of people on the committee for going forward with something like that. There were a number of people on that committee representing a good group of other municipalities in the state who said that they would like to work on that. When it crashed and burned in the committee, I said, this will be coming back. And a number of people nodded knowingly that, yes, it would. That's something that they wanted to work on. And a couple of people approached me and said, keep us in mind. You can count on us. Let's work on this.
That's excellent.
So there was, even though it didn't make it through that committee, there are a number of people around the state who are interested and who feel that it has the best chance if it's statewide.
Oh, no question that if we can do it statewide, but there is also no good reason that failing the legislature effort, that municipalities can't start instituting it on their own.
Right. And it will be dropped as a bill this year. We'll now move on to other agenda items. Just a quick note on there are no additional agenda items for this evening. I just want to note real quickly the upcoming public hearings. Next week, Monday the 13th, we have public hearing on changes in state law regarding alcohol beverage sales in Tacoma Park that we're having a second public hearing on. Also, on the following Monday, the 20th, we have two public hearings on traffic calming measures on both Sherman Avenue and Grant Avenue. The following Monday, the 27th, a public hearing on Community Development Block Grant Program. And as people have noted on that same meeting on the 27th, our final item of the evening on the work session will be discussion of proposals for revision of the tree ordinance and related matters. I want to note for the record, I don't think you all got a copy of it at your place, but I proclaimed September as National Preparedness Month, and there's a copy of a proclamation that you'll get. I see we have some preparedness materials here, and I'm assuming somebody's going to speak to us at public comment on that. And I just wanted to make sure that the proclamation was issued in August so that everybody could recognize the full month of September as National Preparedness Month. The next item is adoption of minutes. We have before us minutes of May 17th, May 24th, June 7th, and June 14th. Would somebody like to move their approval?
Move. Second.
Here, moved by Councilmember Siemens, a second by Councilmember Wright.
That was Snipper.
Sorry, Snipper and Wright. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. It's now time for a public comment period for anybody who'd like to speak to us about anything not on our special session agenda this evening. If you'd like to identify yourself, come forward and keep your comments to 3 minutes. We'd appreciate it.
Yep, my name's Pat Lovelace, 76.
Okay, you got the microphone, Pat?
I got it.
Go ahead.
Yep, my name's Patty Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland. your official peace delegate. Just wanted to welcome you guys back from the break, and I'm glad to be back with my council again. Feels great. And also, we had a busy week at demonstrations. So we had the Martin Luther King march from Dunbar High School over to the Lincoln Memorial, where they're going to build a new King statue. And we've had a 3-mile march about a week ago. And also, we're having vigils at the Walter Reed Hospital on Georgia Avenue. On the Georgia Avenue side, we're having a vigil every Friday night from 7 to 9 p.m. We'd like to get more people to come out there and ask for better treatment of our veterans and ask to bring the troops home now. Save lives, bring them home. And also, I want to let you know that October the 2nd is a big jobs march down on the mall. Keep your eyes peeled and come on down and join us. We need as many people as we can. The economy's bad, we need jobs. And also, the primary is coming up on the 14th. Next Tuesday, we've got to get out there and vote. And after that, we got to vote in November election, so we got to get everybody out there who's registered to vote to come on out, stand up and be counted, be proud of your right to vote. You know, if there's any teachers out there, encourage your students to learn about voting now. Maybe you could have some practice sessions in the schools. Maybe you could teach the kids the importance of voting now, before they even turn 18. They need to learn the importance of and the responsibility of electing our public officials. We got a good council. We got it by voting. We've got good people in the delegates, House of Delegates. We got them by voting. You know, every vote does count. You know, we got to change America's attitude by saying my vote don't count, because I know my vote does count. And also, we've got to do everything we can to teach our people responsibility, and voting is a good way of doing it. So I want everybody to come out on Tuesday to vote in the primary. The primaries are just as important as any other. That's how you choose the ones you want to vote for. Okay, thanks for letting me share. Come on out there, everybody. Come out and vote for peace.
Thanks for your comments. Is there anybody else who'd like to make any public comments?
Hi, I'm April Kissel, 111 Lee Avenue. Is there someone here who can speak to the sidewalk work that's being done on the 100 block of Lee Avenue? The sidewalks are torn up and there's a lot of noise, and I'm sure it's for a good reason. But if someone could just briefly explain what the improvement is designed to be. And I'm probably behind on my communiques. I'm sure this was covered in one of the newsletters.
I'll follow up. You're in my ward, April, and I'm glad to follow up and give you a full report on what's going on there. How do I get in touch with you?
I guess my email.
Okay.
KISSEL, Kissel, 12345 at Comcast.net.
Okay. I'll get back to you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hi.
Kay Daniels Cohen, Sherman Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland. And I'm just here to, as president of the S.S. Carroll Neighborhood Association, to speak about Emergency Preparedness Month. September, as our fair mayor has said, is National Emergency Preparedness Month. I've always been a passionate advocate of being prepared for any bit of excitement that might come our way and be ready to assist neighbors and neighborhoods as well. I presented this information at every association meeting, but it seemed to be kind of ho-hum, a ho-hum discussion until the snowy winter of 2010, when on or about February 2nd, the news forces announced, "Be prepared to shelter in place." Now, I've used that sentence many, many times in many, many meetings, but what does it really mean? The residents of the East Coast, and that includes us a little bit, just discovered what it meant when Earl the hurricane thankfully, just kissed us. It just brushed past and just kept on going north. The residents of South Texas, however, were not as lucky as Tropical Storm Hebron quickly drew down on them within 24 hours. And if they didn't have a plan, they were in deep water, and I think some of them, even today, even in Central Texas, are in deep water. As an unofficial member of the City of Tacoma Parks Emergency Preparedness Committee, I'd like to underscore the committee's special efforts to raise awareness of potential emergencies and disaster preparedness for our residents, not only during the month of September, but throughout the year. Please stop by our booth at the upcoming Folk Festival, and that is, again, Sunday, September the 12th, from 11 to 6. At the middle school, and ask about Plan 9 and pick up your instructions to be ready, make a plan, and be informed. And I kindly brought to the City Council and the City Manager and City Clerk the first little handouts that we have. Plan 9, really exciting. You can look at the pictures and know what you need. For sure, anybody who's here, we'll be handing that out. And Make Ready is just takes you right down what you need to do, and it's wallet friendly, and you keep it handy once you've put all the information down. We'll also be at the Street Festival on October the 3rd. Plus, the committee has created some very interesting public service announcements aired on the Tacoma Park Cable Channel, as well as special articles in the newsletter. The good news is we don't live on the West Coast, where almost every day there's a need to be ready, make a plan, and to be informed. And there really isn't any bad news, because we live in a great community of action-minded individuals. Remember, September is Emergency Preparedness Month, and there will be a great deal of information available at the Folk Festival, the Street Festival, and also at EPC at tacomagov.org. Thank you all for what you do for the community and for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So exciting to be back and to have you all back too.
Anybody else? Okay, the city manager have any comments?
Just a few brief items. During the council recess, the renovation of our Public Works facility got underway. I think the council is aware of this, but just for the benefit of the public, the majority of the administrative staff of the Public Works Department has relocated to the community center for the duration of the construction. So if you need to make arrangements for a special trash pickup or get a tree permit, don't go to the Public Works Department, come to this building.
You'll find a construction site.
Exactly. At your places at the dais this evening, there is some information about parking, and over the last few months there have been some concerns expressed by some residents who live in this immediate area about cabs parking on streets, and there was a question raised about what arrangements each of the apartment buildings has relative to parking for their tenants, and the Housing Department put together the information that is before you this evening, and hopefully that will be helpful to you in responding to any questions. Also at your places at the dais this evening, as Councilmember Wright noted, was some information about the burglaries that have happened in the community over the from August 1st until today. We have experienced 27 burglaries in total. So I did ask Chief Rakucci if he could come this evening and kind of speak about the subject. I'm proud to say he also has some good news to share as of this afternoon.
Welcome, Chief.
Welcome, and welcome back. I hate to put a somber note to start it, but we can end it on a good note. We've experienced since August 1st 27 burglaries, 19 of them being residential, 8 being commercial. The hot item in these burglaries has been jewelry. The most common method of entry has been unlocked or open doors. We have been running special details on the burglaries using detectives, patrol officers, our tactical enforcement unit. When we've had a crime scene, we've been using everything at our available to get as much evidence as possible, which includes DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, processing, serial numbers. We've been checking all the pawn shops, talking with Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Washington, D.C. police departments, working as closely as possible to develop suspects. The good news is, and I don't plan it this way, but I will have good news for Ward 1. We made an apprehension at 11:30 this morning. Detective Joe Butler spotted 2 individuals, a 17-year-old juvenile and a 15-year-old juvenile, residents of Washington, D.C. on Spruce Avenue. They were carrying a laptop and some other items. It was quite visible to him, and going up into the front yard of a residence on Spruce. At the time, he confronted them, and as a result of looking at the evidence that they were carrying, it related back to a burglary. It hadn't been reported yet, but it had just occurred up on Cedar Avenue. We took these two individuals into custody and have arrested them for the burglary there. And going back over and talking to them, and we spent quite a while with them, and they were still being debriefed late tonight. We believe on your chart, if you take a look at your chart, 202 Philadelphia, 7211 Willow, 14 Hickory. If you go to page 2, 104 Elm, we believe these individuals are responsible for and are following them up with the evidence we will get from them today as a result of that arrest. In the other arrest, the other residential, we believe, involved probably two other groups of individuals as a result of some of the evidence. In one of the burglaries, people came home while they were actually in the house, and that was two Hispanic subjects. The commercial, we believe we have several subjects. We're working with Montgomery County and that are responsible for those, and we're still working on those. So even though we have made an arrest today that'll probably clean up Ward 1, we've still got the ones open throughout the rest of the city. But I believe with today's arrests, we'll close those 5, including the ones not even on our chart that happened late this morning, and then the other attempt, which would have been at Spruce. What I wanted to share with you, and sometimes the residents get a little mad at me when I bring up what causes a lot of these burglaries. We debrief these defendants, and in talking to them today, we asked them why they come to Tacoma Park. And our youth are always rather candid and open, and I'm quoting from what the statements the detectives got. We go here because you have a lot of valuables and you leave your windows and doors open. And it's well known to all the young criminals, at least in the District of Columbia. So that's why they're coming here. So I'm once again going to encourage our residents, and we're going to try to put together another program in the fall to protect victims, but we need you to close your doors and windows. It makes it very easy for the criminal when the doors are open, the windows, and this is what these two guys would do. They're a member of a go-go band. We've already confirmed it. One would go to the front door and knock on the door to see if anyone's home. His partner goes around the house and looks for open windows and open doors, side doors and things, as a lot of our older residents have. If someone comes to the door, which happens sometimes, then they solicit for their go-go band and ask for money. And if, of course, they get turned down, or then they move on to the next. But they're also his partners checking the house out so they'll come back later. And apparently this was their M.O. as they went. But they said, we always find open windows and doors, and it makes it so much easier. So I once again will ask our residents to please lock your windows. A lot of people don't look at their windows, and a lot of them are left open from summer or winter before. Lock your windows and lock your doors. We're just making it a little too easy. And when we're letting juveniles, the word gets out, that's not a good thing for our community. To Councilman Wright, we had a carjacking. I think you'll remember one of our elderly residents in November of last year. We took DNA evidence in that case, and just wanted you to know we have identified a suspect through a DNA match, and we have gotten a warrant, and we'll be making an arrest in that case shortly. So our detectives are working hard. DNA really works well today. It's a tool that we now use in burglaries that we didn't used to be able to do. I'll give an example. Last Thursday, we had a burglary go down on Willow, and we got there pretty quick. And when I say quick, within a minute, we were on the scene and it surrounded the house. But what had happened is the victim had come home. There were 3 bicycles out front, which she knew didn't belong in her house, and she saw her window open, but she thought the bikes belonged to a neighbor. She beeped her horn, which gave the suspects a reason to leave. But what we did is we were able to do swabs because of the summer and the humidity, and we got some really good DNA evidence, which will probably link us to the 2 guys we caught today, why we think they're responsible for the burglary, plus they meet the description of what we had. So the good news is we've made an arrest and closed 5 cases. The bad news is we still have 2/3 we're still working, and we will continue to work. I just encourage our residents, and would ask you to encourage them to please lock windows and close doors, and we'll continue to keep our detail on the street, because obviously we just closed part of them in one part of the city today.
Thanks. 2 colleagues have questions. Councilmember Wright.
Thanks for that information about the elderly woman. Will we tell her the status of the case? Because I think she'd be very interested.
At proper
to know.
time.
Yeah, okay.
We will be letting her know.
And then the second one, I guess you answered already. I was curious if the bicycle, because I had heard about that incident from neighbors, if the bicycle incident was connected to the two individuals we caught, and it sounds like you're still checking on that. But
We feel they're responsible, just on the way the burglary went down, the MO, and just the information they were willing to give up. They didn't give up everything, but we believe we'll be able to make it to all that, and we think they're responsible. It's too similar to what went down today and what went down last week.
Councilmember Stevens?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to know if the people you caught today were from residents of the city, or were they from outside of the city?
No, I mentioned they're residents of Washington, D.C.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Councilmember Clay?
I noticed that 1001 Elm is not on here, and I'm wondering, is it outside of the August 1st to September 7th timeframe? Was it not considered a burglary? Why isn't that
If
on here?
it was in August and September, it would be in there, it wouldn't have been considered a burglary then. What's the address?
It's 1001 Elm. It's Joe's house.
Oh, that was before August.
August, okay.
Yeah. And that wasn't a burglary, that was a larceny.
It's a larceny. I got to learn those terms.
Okay, thanks very much, Chief.
That's it.
Okay, then we will move along to our next item, which is presentation. We are being joined by David Robertson, who's Executive Director of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And we considered some months ago a resolution and passed a resolution in support of the COG effort for Region Forward. At that time, Mr. Robertson made a number of presentations to jurisdictions about that. We passed it basically without any discussion, and I thought it would be good to, now that it is in effect and all area jurisdictions have passed it, it's a good time to get a little briefing on that, where things are headed, and it's also good for tonight's discussion because as we're going to be talking about our strategic plan, in some ways this is kind of the regional strategic plan.
Indeed.
So, welcome.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here. The mayor gave me a really nice tour of the reconstruction, not only of your council chamber, but some of the adjacent areas, and so I know you're very proud of that. And among, I get to go to a lot of the boards and council hearing rooms around the region. I think this is one of the nicest for a sort of smaller community, so congratulations to all that helped pull this off. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about a project, as the mayor said, that actually you did the hard part, which is you took the action, I guess it was back in March. The COG Board of Directors adopted this report that you have in front of you this evening, Region Forward, result of a year and a half worth of work, and I'll touch on that lightly and quickly. But it was a springboard to some additional work that I wouldn't have been able to tell you back in the spring, which is a HUD Sustainable Communities Planning Grant that we're real excited about. So again, thank you for your leadership. I think of the 21 jurisdictions that have adopted this, you were the third to do so, and over the span of a couple of months, everybody adopted that, and we're very proud of that. So let me move through this pretty quickly and have some questions. I've been out before you in the spring, I guess, as well, so this won't be new to you, but hopefully we'll refresh your memory on this and talk a little bit why it's important. And we call this Region Forward, and I think it really is really a springboard for the work of the Council of Governments. And I guess I would begin, and sometimes we get questions, why plan for 2050? It's sometimes difficult enough to plan for a budget year or 2 or 3 years down the line, or capital cycles for improvement. And the reasons is really quite stark, and it's important, but you get it as well. There are more people coming to this region. That's a good thing compared to regions that aren't growing. I grew up in the Detroit area, and I can tell you what a non-growing region's like. So growing is a good thing. It's how you manage and accommodate that growth. We have transportation challenges. We have issues, and it was touched on earlier in discussions, climate change issues. So we know there are sort of big macro things out there that are going to affect our communities. What was the impetus? Why did COG take up this issue of Greater Washington 2050? And it's really because we see a convergence. COG can do a pretty good job, I think, of giving you a transportation report on Monday and a climate report on Wednesday and another housing report on Friday. But you know as well as I do that it's how you integrate those issues. How do you make sure that those issues are supporting one another? So we see convergence on a lot of these issues. Like a lot of issues at COG, we knew this wasn't just a government-only issue, and to be successful, we would have to reach out to business and civic folks. Again, I think that's a model that works quite well in this community, so we invited about 40 or so representatives of different community groups and stakeholders and public officials to partner on this 2050 effort, and again, it was about a year and a half effort. What shaped this effort when we got those great folks together? Well, we knew we didn't want to start from scratch, and I suspect that's something that you struggle with in your communities. People sort of churn, new people come in, people go out, but we wanted to start from where we left off. We have some really good legacy products at the Council of Governments. A transportation vision that was adopted in 1998, regional activity center maps that were adopted in 2002, the reality check effort sponsored by Urban Land Institute in 2005. That's the image of the little Legos that some of you may be familiar with. And more recent work through COG are the 2008 Climate and Energy Report. So we started from some important legacy documents. We also wanted to do two sort of newer things, one what we call a scenario workshop, and I'll touch about that in a minute, and a public survey. So we weren't just sort of starting where we left off, but we sort of freshened our information a little bit. The scenario effort was an attempt to look at what we call big moves. What are the game changers? What are the things that are going to happen to us externally that we maybe can't anticipate that are going to have profound impacts on our region in the future? Some of them, certainly climate, energy price, availability of energy, what's the price of energy, but some other things. Technology issues are certainly out there. We all have probably one of these little devices on our belt or in your purse or in your briefcase. That was science fiction not too long ago. It's science fact. What are going to be the devices that are going to shape our workplace and others in 2050? We probably can't imagine them. Probably some of the young people in this community are perhaps thinking about them and inventing them now, but they're really going to affect our life and our future. So we looked at those game changers. We also did a survey, and there was a little bit of discussion around that. You're all public officials. Some of the school of thought was, well, I'm a public official. I stand for election every 2 years or 4 years. I sort of know what the public is thinking. But even with that very legitimate point, we went out and did a survey. The good news for a person that's in the business of selling regionalism, people felt connected to the region. And I was out, I think, and presented to you some of the survey results. Pretty much everybody in the region, to a jurisdiction, felt a real connection to the region. While it's important that they're residents of Tacoma Park or Montgomery or Prince George's or Arlington or the district, they see their connection to the region. That makes the message I tell and attempt to sell a little easier to pitch. There was a desire for regional action. It doesn't replace the localities. Localities have sovereign authorities. This isn't an attempt to usurp the sovereign authorities of localities or counties or states, but there is an interest and appetite for looking at issues regionally. Again, that makes the work of the Council of Governments easier. There were, though, long-term important issues in the survey report that I shared with you previously. No surprise, traffic, transportation, jobs, economy, education, schools, housing, crime issue that just the Chief talked about a moment ago, but a range of issues that are important to our region across the board. Is this a regional transportation? Sometimes there's some misinformation or misunderstanding out there. Is Region Forward an operational transportation plan? The short answer is no. It is, as the Mayor suggested, a bit more of a strategic, higher-level look. What are the issues that we all care about? What are the metrics? And I'll touch on that in a moment. And how are we going to know when we get there? But it is not sort of a day-to-day transportation plan. What it is, however, are four important components: goals, targets, indicators, and a regional compact that you were very proud adopted. COG does a pretty good job of goals. Targets and indicators are harder. If you say, by next year I want to be, lose 10 pounds or do this or, eat better, that's a great thing to say, but how are you going to measure performance? How will you hold yourself accountable? And essentially that's what we have done regionally. We have a number of goals. Again, those are easier for COG, but we think those are important goals. There are 9 goals arrayed in around a variety of issues that are important to the region, and I suspect align very nicely with the goals that you have articulated for your community. What I think is especially interesting about this is we have aligned those 9 goals around 4 principles of sustainability, accessibility, prosperity, and livability. because we know, again, what a lot of our communities know, some of our transportation challenges might be addressed with better focus or attention on housing. Some of our job issues would be addressed if we did a better job of education and workforce training. So what we tried to do is not just sort of look at the 9 goals in sort of stovepipes or silos, but see how they complement one another or integrate and really support one another. And we think that's an appropriate way to go. But beyond the goals, we wanted targets, and we wanted to measure targets. And COG is a voluntary association. City of Tacoma Park doesn't have to belong to COG. We're very proud that you've been for many, many years. So when you say measuring your members or measuring the region as a whole, that's something we have to approach delicately, perhaps, but we think it's real important to measure and hold ourselves as a region accountable. These are regional targets, so it doesn't say we want Tacoma Park to be this and we want Bowie to be that, because you're 2 different communities. There's also wide scale. Fairfax County is 1 million people. That's a big place. Your community is a smaller place. Doesn't mean one's better than the other, just means they're different. They're different in size, they're different authorities. One's in Maryland, one's in Virginia. So the one lesson I've learned in my time at COG, this is not a one-size-fits-all region, and we have to be a little more strategic or surgical in how we go about this. But ultimately, we're looking to measure, is the region as a whole moving in the right direction against these goals and targets? Some of them are going to be more immediate, and some of you are part of our work around climate change, and you know that we will be coming out with some measures around climate and energy issues because we set some goals for 2012, which is just around the corner. Some of these other goals and targets and measures are longer-term issues, so some are more stretch goals, some are things that we can achieve more readily and more quickly. And these are some examples of some of the goals and targets, more LEED commercial and residential buildings, air quality, Chesapeake Bay goals, and so forth. The next issue is sort of the compact, and we're real proud about that, very proud that you are one of 21 jurisdictions that have endorsed this. All COG member jurisdictions are now signed on, and a number of our community partners, the United Way of the National Capital Area, Washington Regional Association of Grant Makers, a number of groups are also signatories to this, because we wanted to have, again, we're a voluntary association, but we felt it's important to get real engagement and buy-in from our member jurisdictions, and the compact really is a tool for that. Again, COG is a voluntary association, so council governments can't compel Tacoma Park to do A versus B, but again, when we have 21 jurisdictions that share the same goals, willing to be voluntarily measured at a regional level, willing to allow COG to report that information to you, I'm a big believer that local officials will make great local decisions, but in a regional context. In the context, and I was real appreciative of your earlier presenter on emergency management because it's so central to what we do. In that field, we have a message, common message, many voices. We understand that Tacoma Park has an issue that may be different than others, but we want everybody essentially to be reasonably singing off the same sheet of music. We knew that when this went out there, we wanted to have real, meaningful public engagement. Again, I know that's something important to your community. And so we went out there and had a lot of people comment on this, put this out for public comment, website, entertained a lot of comments and so forth. For work that we do at Council of Governments, we got almost 400 folks that actually, when we put this out there. And the real exciting thing is that in the graphic is a little goofy. It's supposed to say 81.7%, not 1.7. But basically, the bulk of our comments came from real live folks, not real stakeholders or businesses or whatever, but real live residents that were caring about these issues. So we're real proud about that. And we changed the report based on what we heard. When we put it out there, if you ask people for their opinion, you have to be willing to listen to that and then respond, and not just sort of say, well, that's great, but we want to go this way. A couple of big issues that came out, multimodal connections, the sort of notion that it's not all about roads and it's not about transit, but it's how you blend the two. So multimodal transportation solutions. Green infrastructure, open space and parks, more emphasis on that. I suspect values that would be relevant to your community. More discussion and engagement and targets around affordable housing. And something that we're real proud of, sort of making sure that we're more inclusive. One of the things that came out in the survey that I believe I reported to you some months ago is one of the things people valued most about the region is that this is a very diverse region, and that we have lots of different folks, and we respect that diversity, and we see that as a strength. In too many communities around the country, diversity is sort of a wedge issue, us versus them. And in our region, again, to a jurisdiction, diversity was seen as a strength, not as a limitation or a handicap. And so that was emphasized more in the final report. What are the next steps? Well, we've covered that a little bit, but we've endorsed this. All our 21 jurisdictions by July endorsed this. We're very proud about that. It's frankly one of the few times that we've had everybody sign on board to the same thing pretty much at the same time. We're going to be developing the baseline analysis because, you know, if you're going to measure, you've got to know where you're starting. And so we're developing a baseline analysis. We're going to be updating the regional activity centers. We've created a Region Forward website to be a sort of a little portal for a lot of this information, developing implementation strategies, and in 2012, putting out the first of what will be several periodic reports. However, we were all excited about this. We were looking to sort of bask in our success for a moment or two and then begin the work. But then an amazing opportunity came forward, and that's, you have the other handout about this, and that is the HUD Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant. And I emphasize the regional because it's really one of the most exciting regional initiatives that have come out from HUD in quite some time. They put out $100 million around grant for around the country, giving regions of our size the opportunity to apply for up to $5 million in funds. And the message when I've done presentations is this grant was tailor-made for the National Capital Region, for the Council of Governments, and for the work that we've done in Region Forward. I think it teed us up. I don't want to be overconfident, but we think this is an amazingly good fit for us. What you have here is an abstract of a grant application that we submitted on August 23rd. The notice came out, I think, in sort of June or so, and we had a little less than 2 months to pull this grant together. But because we had this coalition that worked on this Region Forward report, we essentially could hit the ground running. We had the partnerships, the relationships. The HUD grant said it needed to be multi-jurisdictional, multi-sector, focused on sustainability, and it really pinged off all of the sort of the buzzwords that we had in our Region Forward report. What you have at your place is essentially the cover page, the table of contents for the grant application, the abstract. The full application is on our webpage. HUD prescribed some limits, no surprise, 25 pages for this, 15 pages for that, so the full document's up on our website. But that went in August 23rd, and it will allow us to accelerate, fast-track, and really intensify the work that we were planning to do anyways. We're going to be able to do a lot more interesting things in terms of citizen participation and sort of some of the technologies that are out there for visualization and really making what sometimes can be sort of more static planning documents really look alive and get people engaged in the same way that kids play SimCity and some of those really neat video games. We're trying to sort of get that sort of level of interaction. So we're real proud of this, but come yes or no on the grant, we are moving forward aggressively on this, as I said, with the baseline report, the new activity maps, really rolling out the implementation. If we're fortunate enough, perhaps in the fall, to get the HUD grant, we'll be able to go faster, further, quicker, but we're definitely moving the region forward, as the name implies. Appreciate your support, happy to take any questions, and as the mayor said at the beginning, I hope it does inform your work around your strategic plan and the work that you do as a council. I know that there's a lot of support for regionalism and COG broadly in this community, and it will hopefully help you make good local decisions, but in a regional context. So let me stop there and be happy to take any questions.
And if I can just first ask you if there's anything that you knew of that was already set up as a way to kind of come back and touch base with local jurisdictions as this goes forward, how we as a jurisdiction can participate most fully.
Yes. A couple of things. One is we will, working through the Council of Governments, through the COG Board and our Metropolitan Development Committee and our Transportation Planning Board, a lot of this will be very ground up, so your council representatives on some of those groups will have the ability to shape the work, because we wanted this to be sort of a bottoms-up effort, not sort of a top-down effort. So there'll be a lot of developing these metrics or measures that are hardwired or at least outlined in this report, so there'll be a lot of opportunity for participation. We are about probably, we wanted to wait till the summer where people are away, but in the fall, we're going to be rolling out this new Region Forward website, and we'll hope there'll be a lot of cross-marketing with your web. I heard the comments about the updates to your website. We want to co-brand and get that going. And really, if there are ways that we can communicate through your citizen groups or advisory committees, we really want to get the word out for this. And Council of Government's a little bit of a still hidden message. If you know about us, you know about us, and I get the fact that we're not a local government or a state government or a federal government. We're a little murky regional organization, but we really want to use this tool, this Region Forward, because we think it begins to resonate in the community. And I'll give you an example why I think it's important. Two things. One is we have elected officials in their capacity being asked, well, what can you do in your community to elevate this? So we see it as something that gets the local elected officials engaged. It's not COG's report. You own this report as well because your community embraced this. So when you go about your decisions, whether it's Parks and Recreation or some of the safety issues or land use matters or transportation, and I've heard reference to just about all of those this evening in the earlier comment, again, make local decisions in a regional context. The other is you're going to see this play out in different ways in the community. The Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers thinks this is a pretty great way to begin to prioritize how foundations and philanthropic organizations award funds. So if there's measures in here about issues of community equity or any issues, that they will use this as a filter or a lens to help make grant awards so that they will know. A lot of times foundations will say, well, we'd like to give you a grant award, but how will we know if when we give you the money, will it make a difference? Well, we have targets and metrics that everybody has agreed on are important at the regional scale. We're going to be measuring those on a regular basis. So I think you're going to start to see whether it's business, civic, environmental, or philanthropic groups, that they're going to begin using this as a tool. So I think it's going to interact very nicely with the priorities that your community sets through your various committees and citizen groups and then before this council.
Thanks. Councilmember Wright.
First, just applaud the significant effort to pull this together and get all of the stakeholders engaged, and the report looks great and touches on many of the important issues, and I think, as you pointed out, melds them together well. And, one I would just point out is I think it's very important that you combine the cost of housing, cost of transportation when you're looking at affordability, so I applaud that. One question I had related to that is I didn't really see any target around affordability measures, so it was more 45% of that houses in these activity zones wouldn't housing costs wouldn't be more than 45%, but I didn't get a sense of that, if that was as a measure of median or if that was an average target. And one of the challenges there is if you really want to have affordable housing, you have to have some pretty steep discount against what the median is. And in Montgomery County, often we're looking at options of 30 to 50% of median, and 50% really isn't that affordable for someone in a service job in Montgomery County because it's still like $50,000 a year. And so just interested if there's been talk about what that kind of target is in terms of...
Yes, and as you might have guessed, that we've sort of laid out these sort of broad targets and measures. What we're going to be doing in the baseline report is, and some of it's based on data, with the census data hopefully starting to roll out later this fall and into the next year. We think there's going to be better data and information that we can start to use. But what we're going to be doing is sort of fine-tuning those metrics and measures based on availability of data and what's relevant for us sort of at this time period. So I think you'll start to see some more refinement of that going forward.
Great. And then the second question I had is really around one of the things we've struggled with when it comes to global warming and climate control is that the measurement of what we need to measure as a city is sort of hard with our resources to really get our hands around, particularly with things like electricity usage by Pepco and knowing whether residents are using wind credits or not. We've talked about this, I think, one time when you were visiting before, whether cities would be able to get sort of a report for their city, and that would be updated every couple of years, so that we would be able to kind of measure and say, okay, here's our baseline. What are we going to do to address that, and march forward on a city basis? And I know that, we have to think regionally, but if we can't, as decision makers, have information to sort of push forward at the city level, then all those cities won't add up to a regional.
No, it's a great question, and I think we're starting to sort of work through that. Good example, and it might have been just a month or two ago at our climate and energy meeting at COG. We were sort of another small community. Mayor Jay Davis from Greenbelt raised that very same issue, which is, this is great that you're doing these sort of regional climate measures, but smaller communities have fewer staff to work on these. The scale is different compared to a larger urban county to a small community, and how can we help? Because it does no good for COG to push out a request for information if the community doesn't have the ability or the resources or the relevance, if you will, at that scale to respond to that. So we get pretty close to apples and apples, and we're not looking at apples and oranges. And the short answers, based on Mayor Davis and some other feedback that we've gotten, we're going to be essentially creating some technical assistance a little bit to sort of work with communities, so we can come out and assist and figure out, okay, you may not have this data element, but you might have this other data element that can be a reasonable proxy for the same type of measure, so that, again, given the variety of our jurisdictions, we're never going to get apples and apples across the board for everything, but we think we can get pretty darn close. And so what we plan to do is come up with almost like a cookbook, so for jurisdictions to sort of help them, sort of a help tutorial or primer, but then we're going to work with your staff to sort of help, because, again, there's no point in sending a survey that you can't respond to, or if you respond to it, we get apples and oranges, and it doesn't really inform you what the local situation is, because the local situation, when it adds up to the regional whole, is where that's going to be value added. So I think we'll be able to certainly move in that direction.
Great. And then lastly, is just a comment. I would encourage that only 9% of people think that taxes are too high in the region. And I think that's a good signal that people realize that it takes taxes to contribute to having a civil society and investing in communities and actually spurring development. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Really appreciate, again, your support a few months ago, and you'll see me back again. Thank you.
Good. Our next agenda item is a resolution authorizing application for and receipt of financing for approved community legacy projects. Ms. Daines is here.
Good evening. The council is being asked to consider this evening a resolution authorizing the application of, or the submission of an application for 3 projects for funding through the Community Legacy Program. The program announcement came out during your recess, and the deadline, unfortunately, also fell within your recess. So the application has been submitted based on the feedback we received from each of the individual council members when we informally polled you during recess about your support for these projects. And then the resolution will be forwarded to the state pending its adoption this evening. There were 3 projects, as I noted, that are included in the application. The first, and rated at the highest priority, is Facade Improvement Program, which is a continuation of a successful effort we did along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor. The scope of the program has been expanded, however, to include all of the commercial areas within the city of Tacoma Park. And at this point in time, we've received, in response to a solicitation for letters of interest, correspondence from 15 property owners that are interested in participating in that program, one of which is in Ward 4 with the commercial area on Sherman and Maple Avenue that was referenced earlier in the meeting this evening, several in the Old Town area, and 9 of them along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor planning area. The total project costs estimated for that particular effort are $655,000. We're requesting or proposing to request $355,000, $300,000 of which would be matched by private dollars from the individual property owners. The second rated project that we've are submitting for your consideration this evening are streetscape improvements at the Ethan Allen Gateway. This would, total project costs for that are $690,000, with $450,000 of those dollars coming from the speed camera revenue fund to replace missing sidewalks, do some of the planning and engineering work that are eligible expenditures for that resource. The balance, $340,000, we're requesting from the Community Legacy Program, and that would be used for activities that are not eligible under the speed camera fund, landscaping, public art, streetscape furniture, that type of thing. And this would include the stretch from Kentland down to Elm Avenue. So it's on both sides of New Hampshire Avenue as you're going along 410 or East-West Highway. Kentland is near where the U-Haul franchise is, even though that's in Prince George's. The other side is in Tacoma Park, and there are no sidewalks on the residential stretch there. And if you go walking along that stretch, it's unattractive, noisy, dirty, unsafe. And then the third project included within this application are improvements that Historic Tacoma would like to make to its property along Carroll Avenue, so that it would bring it up, both the interior and the exterior of the building, up to code. And as noted in the memorandum, that would include fire separations, required multiple stair and doorway replacements, the installation of an ADA-compliant bathroom. They're also looking for additional funding to renovate the original bathroom, install a kitchenette, put in movable room partitions, and then do some other minor furnishing or finishes that would complete that project so they could apply for a certificate of occupancy. There are $4.2 million of funding available this round. It's limited to capital outlay, capital projects. So we had solicited other business associations within the area to see if they had any projects. Unfortunately, they all fell into the operating side of the equation, and they're not eligible for funding.
And if you can just remind us which projects have been successful before with this process from the city?
We've been really quite successful. We've received funding from everything for the transportation and parking study that was done in the Old Town area in partnership with the District of Columbia about 10 years ago, to green features and landscaping and site improvements for the commercial property that's being redeveloped, Flower and Piney Branch, to market study in Old Town area, the facade improvement program that I referenced earlier that was limited to New Hampshire Avenue, as well as a variety of other streetscape types of improvement projects.
Thanks. Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. I enthusiastically support the recommendations of staff. I really appreciate the amount of work that you put into bringing this together. I know this isn't easy, especially setting priorities. And so I fully support this, and I'd like to move this.
Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Schultz?
On the facade improvement program, you mentioned that you have 15 property owners who've already indicated an interest. Is there room or time for other property owners, or is that time closed?
No, the opportunity still exists, but for us to pull together a successful, or what we consider to be a successful grant application, the more documented proof we can provide to the state that somebody actually wants to participate in the program, and that there is evidence that the funds would be drawn down in a timely manner, the stronger the application itself.
Well, then, following up that, assuming that, this is a big assumption, of course, but that the facade improvement program gets funded at the full $355, and you said there's 9 of those 15 are in the New Hampshire corridor. How does your department go about sort of saying, we'll do this one, but not that one?
What we're going to be doing is hosting 1 or 2 workshops for all the property owners in the community, giving them the information that they need. Some of the folks that have submitted a letter of interest have participated in the program before, so they're kind of familiar with it, but not everyone is. So to get everyone off on even playing ground, we'll give them that information, and then we'll open up the application, open up a round of our own applications with a specific deadline, and then go through and evaluate those projects as they come in before that deadline. It's going to be kind of a combination of first come, first serve versus have you gotten funding from us in the past. I'm also hopeful, though we haven't progressed to a point yet to submit it for consideration to the council, that we can access some of the community development block grant funds for a similar type of effort, but structure that as a facade easement program instead of a outright grant program that would serve the same purpose. So if we get more applicants than we have resources available for, those that would fall within that eligible block grant area, we would sort of funnel off into the facade easement program as opposed to the grant program.
Now, these facade grants, to the extent that you get any money and can award it, does the do the regulations with the legacy program stipulate how quickly or deadline by which those funds have to be encumbered?
If we're successful in our request, we will receive, say we get the $355,000. Half of that has to be spent down and a reimbursement submitted to the state within 12 months, and the entire project has to be completed within 24.
Wow.
So it will be a quick turnaround time.
Yeah, that is quick.
Yeah. The advantage we have is that the program itself is in place already, so the regulations, the forms, all the legal documents, all of that have already been developed. And it's more of just a continuing to market it and work with the property owners and the business owners to submit an application.
I have one other question regarding the historic Tacoma part of it, and it's just really a question of information. It says required alterations include fire separations. What does that refer to? Do you know offhand?
I'm not as familiar with this project as I am with the ones that we developed.
Right.
But as I understand, because of the different uses that they're proposing for the interior space, there have to be separations between the rooms to allow for sufficient amount of time for this room to burn, if you will, before it moves into the other room or goes inside or outside the building.
Do you know then, and this is another question that I would not expect you necessarily to the answer to, is that space sprinklered?
I believe it is not.
It is not. I think that's a concern.
Yes.
Because a fire, regardless of how many separations you got in that small building, as old as that building is, could destroy every historic document that this city has. You know, it's just kind of something I worry about.
Yeah. It's a legitimate concern.
Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
I was one of the ones who submitted an expression of interest, so I'm going to recuse myself on this vote.
Councilmember Ray.
Two questions, 2 lines of questioning. One is on the facade development. I didn't quite understand how you were going to divide it up. So are you going to publicize to all the commercial areas in the city and then bring them all together at once and do an education and then open it up? Because I know first come, first serve historically has been pretty high in the list of who you fund, and just want to make sure that all the commercial areas get a fair shot, in particular some of the ones that are smaller, like in Terry's Ward and Rubens Ward.
Yes, everyone will be given an equal opportunity to apply and will be given the information at the same time.
And then the second one is related to Historic Tacoma. Which of these things are like requirements? So it seems like this keeps ballooning. I haven't talked to Historic Tacoma recently, but the last time I talked to them, the word was that they really needed this ADA compliant bathroom to be able to occupy, open. And now I see these other things to make the building fully functional. Renovation of the original bathroom in addition to the ADA compliant bathroom, installation of a kitchenette, moving electrified room partitions. I don't know if that means they electrocute people or they just move because they're electric, but
It's an historic alternative.
it seems like the stuff keeps adding up, and I thought the ADA bathroom was like incredibly expensive, and this is only $120,000. So I'm just kind of curious about what's really critical for them to open, because we want the doors to open so that the community can enjoy it, and I think we also have an MOU understanding with them where we can hold events there as well.
Their total budget for this particular project, which includes the code issues as well as the other improvements that you were referencing, is about $145,000. So, and then they're matching some of that with some in-kind contributions from the contractor as well as their membership. If I understand correctly, it's just the fire separation, the stairway and the door replacements, and the ADA compliant bathroom that are mandated before they can apply for their use and occupancy permit. The other, as noted in the memorandum, make it a better place to be occupying.
And then I would just point out that fire is bad for documents, but water is too. So truthfully, if we're concerned about the maintenance of the documents, we'd have to have like a CO2 system, like they have in most of these rare book libraries. I'm not sure if we're going to be willing to go that far, so just something to think about.
One of the things that I should point out is as far as the Historic Tacoma project, this will be the second time that it's been submitted through this process. It looked a little different, but basically it was the same building and for other related improvements. What the state will do is they will go through each of the projects. They'll go through the application as a whole, take into consideration those projects that are identified as priorities by the community, and then could fund all of them, none of them, one or two, could fund for the entire amount that's requested, or reduce it based on the funding availability and how they'd like to disperse the funds on a geographic basis throughout the state.
Any other questions? Is there any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, I think we can vote on this. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we have one abstention. Okay.
If you're interested in seeing the Historic Tacoma's section of the application or the others, just let me know and I'll make it available for you.
Thanks. And we'll take up the next item, and then we'll take a short break before we move on to the work session discussion. So next, we're going to take up the resolution providing for an appointment to the Board of Elections. And is anybody going to say anything about that? I know that the applicant, Jim Roberts, is here, and we appreciate your coming and being willing to step forward and hanging around through all of this. Does somebody want to move this resolution?
Move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by whoever on either side of me wants to take credit for it. Any discussion? You want to say anything? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. You're in. And we'll take a short break and come back for our final two agenda items. Yep. discussion of the State Highway Administration proposal regarding Ethan Allen Avenue and Flower Avenue, and I gather also potentially Carroll Avenue. And
Growing and growing.
yeah, and let me just say that I know we've been talking about this off and on, and I think maybe finally we have a bit of a proposal from the State Highway Administration that gives me some hope that we might have finally gotten them off dead center, and I think it's been the result of a lot of push and effort from city staff, Suzanne Ludlow in particular, from Delegate Heather Mazier's office, and I also just wanted to point out that for anybody who might wonder whether the City Council going to the MML convention in Ocean City in June is worthwhile, while I was there was a roundtable discussion with many of the state secretaries, the cabinet secretaries, and I took the opportunity to talk to Beverly Swaim Staley, Secretary of Transportation, and pointed out that we had an issue with Ethan Allen. She was aware of it, but just a number of points of pressure to try and make sure that State Highway Administration would deal with this issue rather than just keep coming back as they had been saying, well, you know, you own it, you deal with it. So we now have a proposal back from State Highway Administration. It requires us to get back to them with some kind of, they thought maybe just a signature and agreement to what they proposed, but this being Tacoma Park and us having the needs that we have and the history with the roads and why we own it, we have to discuss it and see what we're going to do. And Suzanne Ludlow is going to lead us in that discussion.
Thank you. I'll start with, you don't really need to see this close up, but this is a map of Tacoma Park, and there's green lines which show where the state highways are. You know, as most people know, most of our major roads are state highways in Tacoma Park. The little areas of orange are those that State Highway says that the City of Tacoma Park is to maintain, that are part of state highways. Most of them are on Route 410, which is mostly known as Philadelphia and Ethan Allen Avenue. There's a two-block segment also of Carroll Avenue that we are to maintain. The proposal that has been sent to us as the mayor said, is in response to our complaints that State Highway hasn't been adequately maintaining Route 410, Ethan Allen in particular, that segment of 410, and also Flower Avenue has been deteriorating over time. And kind of a history of back and forth. Del Braithwaite is here, and she and I have met with State Highway officials for a couple years now. Each time I'm having the same conversation, which is, you own it, no, you own it, no, you own it, you should be doing the work, and everybody agreeing that work needed to be done. Unfortunately, not only were we frustrated, but residents along the routes were quite frustrated that each time they called, it was somebody else's responsibility to do the work, and the work was getting more and more needed. The proposal is to basically have State Highway officially take all of Route 410, including segments that they say that we own the underlying land of, and maintain them, and in return give us the segment of Flower Avenue that's still designated State Highway, which is the segment that runs from Carroll to Piney Branch. And this is a segment that no longer really functions as a state highway for functional purposes. And it used to, Flower Avenue, which is Route 787, used to continue, I think, all the way to Franklin. And that segment from Piney Branch to Franklin was swapped for Great Seneca Highway at one point. And so now there's just this little short segment that's Route 787. It doesn't really perform a state purpose. So the proposal is that we take that over and maintain it after the state fixes up both 410 and Flower Avenue. As the mayor referred to this, we do have a history with state highways in Tacoma Park and concerns about our highways. And I've included at the back of the packet, I saw some of you looking at it, one of the classic drawings, I bring this out to visitors all the time, that includes the old plans for one segment of the North Central Freeway, which has a butterfly curve very close to Piney Branch in Philadelphia, and was essentially a divided freeway that would have damaged a lot of the character of Tacoma Park, many homes, and really divided the community. For that reason, there's been strong sensitivity to just not having control of our local roads. And the assumption is, and I don't know that we've ever found proof of this, but the assumption is that the reason that some of the land underneath segments of 410 are Tacoma Park ownership is to help limit widening of Route 410 through Tacoma Park. And whether or not that was part of the stated intent and how that came about, it certainly is a feeling, a strong feeling in Tacoma Park. The proposal and the letter that the mayor could have just signed and had this all done with does not reference kind of how, if there would be any controls that State Highway might have over 410 in terms of would they widen it in the future, what that kind of constraint would be. And I think that one of the things that is important is that we identify language as part of an agreement that would say what our vision is of the function of the road and how, if there was a proposal to do any kind of widening, how that would be coordinated with the community and with the city of Tacoma Park. I can see, it is a very narrow right-of-way through Tacoma Park. I can see some minor widening for bike lanes at times, or if transportation, I mean, this is a permanent change. So in 40 years, if we have real different kinds of transportation vehicles or modes, some different configuration or width of a right-of-way may be more appropriate, but how would we continue to protect the community, and how would that be discussed? And I think we need to talk that out and come up with some kinds of language about that. In general, I think that Route 410 is an appropriate state highway, and it does make functional sense that it be owned and maintained by State Highway. The discussion of Flower Avenue, I think, is a little different. One of the things about Flower Avenue is that it used to be that we owned, the city boundary went down the center line of Flower Avenue from where Wilkinson Hall is up to Piney Branch. And there were complaints by the neighborhood of speeding on Flower Avenue. The city was petitioned to annex the other lane of Flower Avenue up to the curb so that our police department would give tickets on both directions. And we went through the annexation process and annexed to the curb line. What that leaves is Montgomery County right-of-way between the curb line and the property lines on the Silver Spring or east side of Flower Avenue. This is very difficult for us to work with when it's that small of an area, and Councilmember Snipper is familiar with how little interest the county has on maintaining and improving the sidewalks in that segment. It has been in the capital improvement program for a number of years. Each time we advocate for it, it stays in the list, but it's always in an out year. And it is important that we have good sidewalks on both sides of that street. It's heavily walkable area, and it's got a lot of people walking in that area. But one side of the street is just miserable. And if you're trying to ride the bus both ways, it is dangerous. One of the proposals that we've been discussing is how could we, if we took the full right-of-way, make this a nicer street as part of all of this project. There is a discussion I know that was having about some grant money that may be available to do a Green Streets street improvement project on Flower. So I raised that with the officials at State Highway. What could we do could they just give us the money that they would have spent on Flower Avenue and we do a full project? They are still researching that. They're hesitant because 80% of the money was going to be federal funds, probably stimulus money through what they call their Fund 77. So giving us the cash probably is not an option that they can easily do. There may be some other ways to do this, and it could be that if we got the authority to fix up the sidewalk on the east side and kind of fix up our side as well, then later on the state could come in and do the actual repaving, and perhaps they could have start on Route 410 doing paving in the spring as opposed to Flower Avenue in the spring, and then do Flower Avenue later on when we had the sidewalks completed. We're bouncing all of these different options off. We'll come to you as we find out what may be possible. But that's something that we are trying to work out with State Highway. How could we possibly come up with the right kind of package that means that we're not cutting up something that just gets done to overall make this a better street? Also, as the mayor said, we do have this 2-segment block of Carroll Avenue. We've asked State Highway that also be in the mix. It would be kind of crazy to have get all of this resolved and then just have 2 blocks of Carroll Avenue that we're to maintain. And I think that would be incorporated as part of this discussion, but we don't have that confirmed yet from State Highway. I've presented a good deal of information in the package. I am excited that State Highway is interested in moving this quickly. The idea that they might be able to do the work in spring and summer of 2011, so pretty fast for this kind of thing, is good news for us. They certainly, I think, feel like they want to work with us, and I think in general it makes sense. How we go forward in terms of the language I think is important, and I wanted to hear from you about what your general sense is of this proposal, and if there's some particular cautions that you have or that you'd like to have investigated.
Because we are continuing to talk with the State Highway Administration staff about details and particulars and schedule.
Right, and I think that they understand that interest.
Okay. Councilmember Clay.
Well, it's good that we have come this far, and getting, in particular, getting 410 section that runs through Ward 2 repaved. I know some of the other areas are in bad shape, but I actually think that the area between the junction and Elm Avenue is the worst. So I am okay with a lot of this, but I also have some concerns. So talking about 410 first, my concern about 410 is that I was really kind of excited, actually, when we decided that the city did own it again, and therefore we could start coping with the permitting process, because I think 410 was repaved when I first moved here in 2003. And it was in pretty good shape when I moved here.
It's been quite a long time.
Did they surface it?
There might have been some patching done. I think there was patching done.
So it was in pretty good shape, and then people started working on their houses, or people continued working on their houses, and were cutting into the road surface and had crappy patch jobs that they did, which then deteriorated all around them. And I was appalled. It was sort of my first introduction to being appalled at West Coast versus East Coast road maintenance. I was appalled that they were allowed to get away with that. I'm like, where's the enforcement people? And after talking to our public works people, it turns out, well, it was enforced by the state, which meant there wasn't any enforcement at all, none whatsoever. Nothing about the permits, no holding back the bond. And, of course, I was always thinking, well, if we were in California, they would have kept their bond, and then they would have gone out and fixed it, and then they would have billed it to the property owner. But none of that happens. And so instead we get these awful roads. And I think after I'd lived here for a year, I had to replace the tie rods in the front end of my car, which I had never had to do. And I had some crappy cars, and this was a pretty new car. And I was surprised I had to replace tie rods. And I'm sure it was from Ethan Allen. So So I was excited at the prospect that we would actually get to control the permitting process, and that if a contractor from whatever utility or whatever construction company was working on someone's house, that our own Public Works Department, which I dearly adore, would be able to go out and hold people accountable for that. And I'm concerned that if we just go back to what should have been the status quo, that we will lose that newfound ability to hold people accountable, and there's no reason to expect that their code enforcement is going to be any better after they repave the street than it was over the last 7 years. And certainly their financial situation isn't going to get better in the next 10 years, so it's not like they're going to repave it and then somehow they're going to find new money to do code enforcement and they're going to stop people from making these crazy cuts into the street, and we won't be facing this again in 3 years, and they will come back and tell us, well, we repaved it for you 3 years ago, go away. So I'm concerned about that. I was also a little excited about the newfound ability to paint crosswalks across 410 at Elm Avenue in particular, because that's always been a big deal. There was talk at one point in my ward of making midnight runs to the Duron Paint Company, which apparently sells the crosswalk paint, and they would do, you know, midnight paintings of crosswalks, because I was told by our Public Works Department that it would be illegal for us to just go out and paint the crosswalks, even though they're already there and they've faded. It's an incredibly dangerous place to cross the street. I actually make my children, if they want to cross, walk up to Jackson Avenue where there's a stop sign, so that they at least get to cross where there's a stop sign, and then they can walk back down to Forest Park, but I don't let them cross at Elm Avenue because it's too dangerous. So I was excited about the possibility for doing some code enforcement and for having some painted sidewalks. I don't know if that's worth the cost of you know, maintaining the roadway, because the other part of it is I agree. It is a state roadway. It gets traffic from everybody and their brother and their brother's cousins and their aunts and uncles and whoever's going to work in every which direction comes across the East-West Highway. And so it gets a lot of traffic, and it's not fair to ask the citizens of Tacoma Park, the residents of Tacoma Park, to shoulder that burden. So I have those concerns about that. I'm fine with the Carroll Avenue trade. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have that street, and I don't see much advantage to holding any control over it unless somebody who's more familiar with that particular section does. About Flower Avenue, I'm happy to pave Flower Avenue. I like the idea of owning Flower Avenue for some of the same reasons. It was a designated state highway. There's no reason for it to be. Its end route on a state highway is a pain in the neck for people who live in the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood, because it becomes this throughway down to Sligo Creek Parkway, which, if you've ever been on the 18-foot wide section of Flower Avenue where there's people go through, you'll know that that's really miserable. It's 18 feet wide with parking on only one side. It's pretty miserable. Owning Flower Avenue would provide the opportunity to maybe deal with traffic even before it gets to the Carroll Avenue Flower intersection. Lots of controls. I'm happy about that idea. I'm excited about the possibilities there. I'm not as supportive of taking over the right-of-way, so I would like to hear more from the Ward 5 person about that, because I'm not sure it's fair to ask Tacoma Park taxpayers in perpetuity to maintain sidewalks in front of homes or businesses or properties that don't pay property taxes into Tacoma Park. It's bad enough to tell people that we have to double tax them, but then we tell them not only that, but we have these people who right on our border. They could vote. I think they could vote themselves into the city if they wanted to. But like part of what you get when you do that is you get Tacoma Park Services, which includes the Public Works Department and their team coming out and installing sidewalks in front of your house and fixing things and doing the free right-of-way stuff like that. And it's a hard sell for me to say to my constituents, yeah, we're going to give all these services to these people, but they're not going to pay the same taxes that you do, and your taxes are going to go to pay that. There might be a compelling reason for that, and I'm certainly open to hearing it, and that's where I'm at.
If I can just comment on two quick things that you were saying. The last one that you were just talking about in terms of people not residing in the city but having a sidewalk in the city, it's the inverse of the situation that we have on Eastern Avenue with the District of Columbia, where they own the sidewalk and maintain the sidewalk in front of our residents. And
I have less empathy for them.
And New Hampshire Avenue.
New Hampshire also. And the other thing, I was wondering if you were making a request for us to consider as language to go into the agreement, some format whereby the city gets some sign-off authority on repairs.
That would be a reasonable, I think that would be a reasonable solution, is that we would have some portion, some permitting control or a third level on the permitting, and also that we would have the right to paint the crosswalk lines on the crosswalk.
Because I think whatever we want to try and put in the agreement, now's the time to get it on the table. We may not be successful in some things, we will be successful on others, but we won't get it if we don't ask for it.
Right, so intersection controls at Elm and Ethan Allen to include being able to paint the crosswalk, and I think also being able to put the lights in that says, pedestrian crossing ahead, that sort of thing.
And
I mean, we would love it if the state would put it in, but if they wouldn't and we could, it would be important.
So the proposal would be to give them the road, but if we wanted to put some things on the road, we could put them at our own expense.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, it was Councilmember Snipper was next.
Okay, I'll go in reverse order what I was going to do. I'm in favor of this. I think it's a great idea to swap. I am concerned a little bit that we have language, as you were indicating, we would put in to prevent them widening 410 without some kind of Tacoma Park input. I can imagine widening it a bit so we had bike lanes or something. That seems like a useful idea. But the North Central Freeway was a very scary prospect. Wakes you up. The sidewalks on Flower Avenue. There are a surprising number of kids in Tacoma Park who go to Rolling Terrace from my ward, because that's the district we're in, school district we're in, and they actually try to walk on that side of the street. And, man, you really can't. You can walk, there'll be a block, you can walk there, and then there'll be a block where you can't. What do? I mean, it's really crazy. And it's very hard to cross Flower Avenue anyway, and getting kids to, cross and then cross again, they never do it. So they're, up on this weird asphalt sidewalk on the Silver Spring side, and it's really pretty dangerous. And there are a lot of people who walk on Flower Avenue anyway, because there's a lot of apartment houses, and they walk to Flower and Piney Branch. So Alana and Blanchard has done yeoman's work trying to get the county to put in sidewalks in that little stretch. But because it requires the cooperation of the county and the state, it's been virtually impossible. When we finally got agreement, and then the county said, well, we'll put it on our, CIP, as we heard, every year it just gets pushed back and pushed back and pushed back endlessly. And then the other reason I think we should have Flower Avenue is for better traffic control on that street.
That all sounds reasonable. What are the stormwater ramifications?
There are stormwater ramifications, because we would own the stormwater on the Silver Spring side.
Yeah, I mean, the reason, when the discussion came to annex the other lane of Flower Avenue, I mean, there was a conscious decision not to take the full width for cost reasons, for the stormwater and the sidewalk. And so that was the discussion. Over the years, it's been just a problem having a line that doesn't, a border that doesn't really make sense out in real life has been difficult. And, when this issue came up and Flower Avenue was mentioned, when I went to the city manager, and I said, I know this would cost us some more money, but it is my recommendation that we try to make this make some sense. And so it is a recommendation I have just from a practicality point of view that it would work better to do that. I recognize that there is a money portion of that. I am hopeful that some of these funds, grant funds and other funds that we've been able to, the sidewalks is about the only thing we can really do right now. So it may be the time that we can do this.
And I agree thoroughly with your observations on 410. I think the city does need to have some kind of control over things like painting the crosswalks once in a while, so it's in living memory when they've last been painted, that kind of thing.
Is there any point in trying to make this a tripartite agreement on that and get Montgomery County to kick in on that side infrastructure as part of the deal?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we've not done, I wanted to wait and talk with you this evening, but we haven't had the conversations with Montgomery County. They may be perfectly agreeable to contributing something if they don't have to do it, take it on as a project. They may be agreeable to allowing us to go forward with work before annexation would have taken place. So there's lots of discussions to have. I would like to talk just a moment about annexation. Annexation is a state process that involves some fairly standard steps that we have to go through. We don't have to have petition drive with property owners because this is right-of-way. So it's much simpler than a normal annexation process. But we do have to show that we have the capacity to afford the maintenance of what we add. And about the only entity that can challenge that is Montgomery County. As far as I've learned in the past, if the annexation laws haven't changed since the 90s, they can simply raise it as an issue. The county can raise it as an issue through the state process, but they really can't say no. And so it's a fairly straightforward process, but it does take some legal steps to go through it, and you'd have a number of votes that you'd need to do that.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Wright.
I don't know, I'm just a little uncomfortable with giving up the ownership over 410. And I think it mainly has to do with the fact that it's been many years where they haven't owned it, and they've repaved the street many times. Probably not as many times as we would like, and more times than they would like. But I don't quite get what's changed. I'm a little scared of them having ownership and deciding to try and widen it in some way, because I agree with you that there are alternative modes of transportation. Maybe you'd want to widen it a little to have a bike lane, but my experience with SHA is they're very focused on moving cars, and their solution to the congestion problem was to build another roadway called the ICC, and not really focus on alternative ways to move people. And so it's sort of like they have a hammer, and their solution to congestion is to bang things with that hammer in the form of more roads. And I'd just be worried that they would somehow get focused on widening it. I think it would just be too expensive for them to truly widen it, because they'd have to buy a whole set of houses along the way, but widen enough that it becomes a big community battle.
If I might, though, it's not a thing that they can just do. One of the things that goes through with any state highway project is it has to go through a whole transportation review process, and it has to end up being adopted by the Montgomery County Council as part of its transportation plan for Montgomery County to have a change to that level, which is a fairly extensive, time-consuming, several-year process just to that point, and then it kind of goes to the next level. So while I certainly understand that concern, it isn't something that they can kind of unilaterally do. And I just want to let people know that that there is a really quite involved process that involves our state delegates, and the annual road show is part of that whole discussion. So I don't want to somehow give the impression through this forum that it would be something that would be simple for State Highway to do, whether or not we had that control.
Yeah, no, I know it's not simple, and we probably have a lot more political influence in this than we do over, for example, the college. But the college has a whole process they have to go through, but at the end of the day, they don't really have to listen to anybody. Process. It's reassuring on one level that there's a process, and on another level, process is just process. And often it can mean you have to check a bunch of boxes and do what you want to do anyway. So maybe if I understood more about what that process truly is, and that points for us to truly stop something if we didn't like it. And then the other thing is, I'm just curious about precedent around the state. Like, are there other places where municipalities or counties own the highway, and what happens with this kind of relationship? And
if I might, one of the things that I don't have an answer back on yet is I was trying to inquire about some legal advice about what are options that the state highway folks have, get some real clarity about processes, and also what kind of language or whatever would have some weight. And I think that that's information that we need.
And maybe we're the only place that actually owns the road.
Yeah, I have no idea.
And that's kind of an odd thing, and maybe it shouldn't be that way. So, but if it's done in a lot of other places and the state highway is paving away, I'd be a little suspect that we should have to give up the ownership to get our roads paved appropriately.
Yeah, one of the things I did put in the cover memo is I think that, this is something that has lasted since the 60s, I think. It wasn't an issue until money was tight and State Highway was looking for ways to not do things. So that's, I think that's just one of those things that would be interesting to find if there are some other locations and what they've done. Yes, Darrell?
I did take that question to MML, through their Public Works Directors Association, and got response back probably from 6 jurisdictions that said, no, State Highway owns the State Highway in my jurisdiction. It isn't an exhaustive research by any means, but I didn't find any other jurisdictions that had the same situation as we currently do.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, in regard to Councilmember Wright's comment, it kind of is look at it from the state's point of view, the Tacoma Park having the reputation it does for kind of being of a single-mindedness about certain things, that they might even be afraid that one day we could decide to develop or close our section of Philadelphia Avenue and build a wall across Route 410 because we own that piece of Philadelphia Avenue. So, and it's not likely to happen. I just don't think that the state's going to exhaust itself trying to widen a street where the entire city is liable to lay down literally in front of the bulldozers if everything else should fail. But the two-block section of Carroll Avenue, now I finally understand why the long length of Carroll Avenue was paved from University all the way down to all the way down to Long Branch, and then it stopped, or maybe a little beyond Long Branch. And that little section that goes from the intersection at Flower towards down towards Long Branch there for a couple blocks never really got paved. Is that the reason? I guess it is.
Yes.
So I would very much welcome their ability to own that piece of Carroll Avenue along with Flower Avenue so that the city can pave it, because I drive on that piece of Carroll Avenue often, and it is a mess. As far as Flower goes, I would wholeheartedly support the annexation of that space from the curb to the property line for several reasons. I mean, one is that Flower Avenue is one of the entrances to the city of Tacoma Park. When you come down Flower Avenue, going south on Flower Avenue, the left side of the road, the east side, it looks just god-awful. It just looks crazy. And yet, on the right side of the road as you're going down, there's a nice curb, there's a nice sidewalk, and everything looks orderly. And anybody would come there isn't going to know which side of the highway isn't Tacoma Park. So I think that by getting that annexation done, we could at least control and beautify and make some orderliness out of one of the entrances to our city. Particularly now, we're going to be spending some of that legacy money on a property that's very close to the intersection of Flower Avenue in the next few months, getting a building renovated. I also think that if we don't do that, and we do get the road repaved, but we don't own the curb, then the lack of a curb is just going to cause the pavement to deteriorate, because there's no way you can butt that pavement up against anything, and it'll just cause a physical deterioration of the pavement on that side of the street. And of course, if we don't try to annex it, it sounds to me like we're going to be in a endless conversation with Montgomery County about the capital improvement program, which is going to be a big waste of your time and everybody else's time, and we're never going to see this side. We might all be, in nursing homes before that happens. So I think it'd be a really good idea to do that. And finally, with regard to Route 410, one concern that I have is that my instinct originally is basically that we should take up the state on its plan. But it occurs to me that we're at the point of launching this task force on Tacoma Junction. And I would hate to see anything done through this particular decision-making process that would impede the task forces and the city's ability to do any traffic engineering through that intersection at Tacoma Junction. I mean, the traffic lights, the traffic movements are not efficient at the present time, as well as pedestrian movements. And there's solutions there that can be done, one of which is the possibility of installing a circle to make the traffic flow so we can eliminate some of the traffic lights in that intersection, particularly the traffic light at Carroll that seems to cause traffic to sit there for, close to a whole minute while nobody goes through the intersection in any particular direction. So I hope that if we do decide to go through this and accept the state's proposal, that somehow or another we protect our ability to try to modify the traffic patterns, so that if we find a way to improve the traffic flow through there, that the state's not going to come back to us and give us a lot of, funny talk about why we can't do something that we really do need to do. But otherwise, I think it's a good idea to try to do it.
So,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that the deputy city manager could hold up the map again so we all see how close what we own runs to the junction.
Well, basically, the section of Carroll Avenue and the junction, that's both Carroll Avenue and Route 410, is state-owned. And we own Philadelphia going down the hill and Ethan Allen heading down to New Hampshire. So the segment that probably the traffic circle would be in is already state highway owned, but, obviously, you'd have to have all kinds of coordination, and I think that I'm sorry?
Or so they claim.
Or so
they claim it's state-owned.
Yes, well, I will say the one thing that I don't think that either Darrell or I or anyone from the state has actual documents that absolutely prove that we own the areas that are orange. It just, the preponderance of the evidence goes that way. And
But it's not beyond a reasonable doubt.
it's not beyond a reasonable doubt that they own the whole thing, or we do. And it's just one of these things where there's just not a good record.
And is the sense that there isn't a good record potentially because they were local roads before there was a state highway system, and therefore, at some point in the past, we owned them all?
We did certainly own them all earlier. There was very interesting history about how 410 was designated. Some of the documents, I think, have been lost. I know that when we were trying to define the eastern boundary of the city and trying to determine kind of where the city boundary crossed East-West Highway, east of New Hampshire, State Highway was not able to find the documents in its archives. And so I think that it's just one of those things where this was at a time when all kinds of stuff was going on, and for some reason, we just don't know.
Councilmember Robinson.
I'm supportive of this. I just have a clarification on the junction, or a clarification or two. I remember kind of a rumor running around that the county had control of the junction stoplight, but then I remember that that's not the case.
It was supposed to be the case, but it never turned out to be the case.
It was supposed to be the case. In other words, state was going to give to the county the authority to manage that stoplight, but the county never picked it up.
Because the state never did the work that the county required.
It has to have expensive technical improvements to the, wiring or controls of the traffic signals, and the state has not spent the money to do that. And the county won't accept it until that work is done.
So is it that the intent is to give the control of that stoplight to the county?
Yes. The overall intent is for all Montgomery County all signals in Montgomery County to be in the Montgomery County system so that they can control the flows through the big traffic control center. Ours are the only ones that aren't in there.
Because I'll say 8 years ago, I could be off by a few years, but when former Mayor Porter and I talked to the county folks about this, the only ones at that point that were not in their system were a few in downtown Rockville and the ones in Tacoma Park. So it sounds like they've done the ones in Rockville.
I think we're the only ones.
So now it's just us.
Well, what would the scenario be if somebody wanted to address whether it's Tacoma Junction Committee or someone else wanted to address the traffic in the junction? Would it then go to the county, the state and the county, and say, well, we want this?
The county won't really have a role. This is simply for traffic control of once the signals are in the computer system. In terms of how the function would be, that would be State Highway and our discussions with State Highway.
Okay, so.
But I do think that bringing up the whole issue about how traffic should be changed or flows through this area should be part of this discussion about this transfer.
About the transfer?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, if that should be part of the discussion, how would that play out? In other words, we would continue the direction we're going and say, as we're working with this, we'd like to have this discussion, and then hope that they'd say, okay, fine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of what the state is planning on doing, is right now, they would like to have some agreement with us within just a couple months, so that in spring and summer, their contractors can do the paving. My understanding is that the paving wouldn't come into the junction. It would start right there, probably, what is it, at Sycamore, and go down to Elm, or just past Elm, and then...
But they wouldn't deal with the traffic light at that time?
That's right.
Okay. I've looked at the junction intersection for years and years and years and years and years, and I've considered the notion of a traffic circle, and I remember when we asked the state to weigh in, and they sent back some drafts, and it irritated a lot of people, partially because the traffic circles were really huge. They were big traffic circles, and they said, in essence, well, if you put one at the junction, then you have to put one in front of the fire station because you don't want backup at that one, too. And it was kind of unfortunate in that it was kind of cart before the horse. We weren't officially talking about traffic going through that whole stretch. It was more that state offered up an option because we asked for it, and it wasn't cohesive or coherent conversation in my mind. I'm not convinced at all that a traffic circle would do any good. In fact, I'm not convinced that there's any way, except for minor tweakings, to make the existing traffic light get much better. I've sat through that thing so many times, and you're right, Fred, it is a minute or a minute and a half or something when you think nothing's happening, but things are happening. Things are happening. Lights are going on and off.
Phantom cars are coming out of Sycamore.
And cars are coming out of Sycamore. And every once in a while, a pedestrian gets to cross. They're really good. And so I don't know. Those are my concerns mostly on this process, on this discussion. Mostly revolve around that 2-block stretch. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Although, like as I say, I'm not at all convinced that traffic circles are the way. But thank you for clarifying what the county's role would be if we ever got that far.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. Carroll Avenue, I think, is easy to just say yes. Flower Avenue, I support that annexation. And I wonder if, instead of worrying about the putting in sidewalks in front of homes that are outside of our jurisdiction, why don't we just annex those homes too, and then they'll be within our jurisdiction. And we might even consider annexing all the way to University Boulevard and from Viney Branch to Carroll. And that, I think the residents of that area would be pleased to join Tacoma Park.
They already call us for police services anyway.
Yeah, and that's maybe a little less serious proposal at this stage, but annexing the residences along the Flower Avenue is a serious proposal. And then as far as Ethan Allen goes, I think I have to look at East-West Highway outside of the city, and it's a major highway, and I look at it in the city of Tacoma Park, and I wonder if the state highway would maybe have a little bit more control over what happens if they own the road, the entire road through the city of Tacoma Park. And so I would join Councilmember Wright in being leery about turning that over to the state. I think it's nice that we would put in safeguards, but I think of some of the other dealings that we have with jurisdictions that are larger than us, such as the county and state, and how fairly that they play sometimes. I think if we think about the tax duplication issue is one example, that ceding any control to the state, even with safeguards, may not be very safe. And I'll also say that, again, based on history, and I'm not going to spend time going through examples right now, but I think that we have seen that some of the safeguards we've put in place, such as with the Tacoma Metro, get lost over time. And so I'm not, again, I'm not supportive of turning Ethan Allen over to the state.
And I was just going to add on the section that Councilmember Siemens just brought up about what's east of the city on 410. I remember that, I don't know, I'll say 10 years ago, it could have been more. It was more like 15 years ago. The state had in its constrained long-range plan, if that's the right term, to widen that section of 410 to 3 lanes each way. And the city basically said at that point to folks at the state and probably the delegates in districts 20 and 21, because 21 included part of the city at that point, that it was crazy to consider widening that piece when all it was going to do was choke at New Hampshire Avenue as it came through us on one lane. And we made the argument that just being one lane each way was never going to change in Tacoma Park. And the state took that plan out of their system to widen that portion of Ethan Allen that's now in unincorporated Prince George's, or that portion of 410. And so I hear the concern, I understand the concern that my colleagues have expressed about if we give up control, no matter even if we put safeguards in language in some kind of agreement with the state to prevent them from widening, that they're still going to come do something anyway. And I have experienced for longer than I care to think about the difficulty of dealing with larger jurisdictions and what they can do to us in the end if they feel like it. I also have great faith in the ability of this city as a political entity and its residents being their most active to make sure that the things that we don't want don't happen. And I think we're very accomplished at that and have a long history of that and have a well-deserved reputation for that. And so I think in the end, I come down on the side of feeling that even if whatever language we put in to try and safeguard our interests in the future, if we do make the trade for Ethan Allen, I think that we will be able to prevail in the long run no matter what. And I think maybe some of the benefits of making the trade at this point make sense in the near term and hopefully in the long term and are worth going that direction. As far as Flower Avenue, I would want to have in some agreement that we have with the state some firm understanding from the county about what they would or would not do for that portion that we would annex in on the other side of Flower, because I feel like it's theirs. They should have done it before. They acknowledge that by having it in their CIP, and they have to come through on something like that. We are not going to just pick that up for them and expend that money, or even, I wouldn't even be supportive of if it were down to a position of, well, but we're getting grant funding to do that. I feel like it's their responsibility to do, and they need to provide the funding to do that. But I think if we get that, it makes sense to take that in, because I think some of the implications are even more on the stormwater side than they are in terms of the making sense of it with the sidewalk. That I think the stormwater is in many ways the more crucial aspect of it. And council members Snipper and Wright and Siemens, and Snipper, Wright, Clay, and Siemens all have more comments, so go in that order.
No.
You don't?
No.
Oh,
You just didn't turn mine on.
No, are you sure?
Yeah.
Councilmember Wright.
I just want to point out there's drastically different durations until members of the council end up in nursing homes. And in some cases...
You could be
it might
surprised.
A very long time until some of us end up in a nursing home.
That just reinforces my point. It could be a very long time.
Councilmember Siemens.
I also had just not had my button turned off, but since I have the floor, I'll say that...
Councilmember Clay.
I'll say that, I have full confidence in our state delegation and the power of our grassroots power here in Tacoma Park. But I look at some of the issues that have gone on recently in the years that I've been involved in the city, such as the property around the metro, and also the tax duplication efforts. And our state delegation by itself is not able to do as much as we would like, nor the grassroots support of the community. So again, I urge my colleagues to not give up the Ethan Allen. Thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
Well, I did actually specifically push my button to say one more thing.
I knew somebody did.
I did. I specifically did not mention the eminent domain issue as a major concern for me, because I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that our claimed ownership of the road is some major impediment to the state of Maryland coming in using their state power of eminent domain, which they hold, whether we own the property or not, to keep from widening the road or putting double-decker metro rail through it or whatever it is that they wanted to do. It is the people of Tacoma Park and the surrounding jurisdictions that would make the difference in whether or not that happened or not. Not, I personally believe, who holds title to the road. And that has been my professional experience in every interaction that I have ever even looked at as a planner, that at no time did the land holdings of a lower jurisdiction have any impact on the eminent domain, the execution of eminent domain power of any higher jurisdiction.
If I might, I think one of the things that I mentioned very at the beginning was that, to me, it may be the most important part of any language, if we were to go forward with this, is to talk about the vision of and the role of how 410 should function through Tacoma Park. Because one of the things that happens is that whenever there's new plans, you go through the next master plan, there's a new kind of road plan for the county, that's the kind of thing that they look at more than, oh, it's supposed to be 80 feet wide, or it's identified as an arterial, or whatever. They do look at the language about what is the agreed-upon vision of and functionality of something. So I would think that as we go forward, if we go forward, that crafting that language ends up being important, and having a shared understanding on paper that the county council, the planning board, the transportation planning board, whomever ends up getting involved in something in the future, then goes back and looks at. And sometimes that, I find, is more useful than, as Councilmember Clay mentioned, an ownership record or something like that. I think the significance is why would we have the ownership or whatever that would indicate that we were that concerned about how the road would function in our neighborhoods. And so that's, I think, something that would be useful to develop if the council decided to move forward that way.
Essentially providing legislative intent language.
Correct.
Councilmember Schultz.
Just a question that I have. These two major options that are laid out in this, the letter from the Secretary, are they in any way linked in the sense that we will be, or she's saying that we will be happy to do X give you X if you will let us have Y or some other thing, because I think I got the impression that the earlier suggestions that came out of that agency earlier this year, last year, were kind of a deal.
Well, I think it is a deal in that the state sees advantage of moving forward with paving if they know they can get Flower Avenue off their records. I mean, that saves them money. It gets rid of something that they don't think needs to be as part of their state highway plan, and so it's justifiable. So I think that's how they consider it a deal.
But I guess the other way, turning it around, is if we took Flower Avenue, said, well, yeah, we like this proposal, we'll be happy to do that, but we don't like your other one, would that kill both of them?
I don't know. I mean, I think we can talk about it, and so far the staff has been good to talk with. I think we need to continue to talk with them.
Thank you.
So if I can sum up where I think we are, we want staff to continue to talk to State Highway Administration. We've provided a number of additional points that we would like to put in an agreement if we go forward with an agreement. It sounds like there's really no difference of opinion on the council about the Carroll Avenue segment. There's some give and take on the Flower Avenue piece in terms of particularly the tie-in with the county and the annexation of that other piece from the curb line to the property line. And there's, as is to be expected, a lot of angst about Ethan Allen, and it may come down to the details and people's willingness to agree or disagree with the point that I thought Councilmember Clay made at the end there about it doesn't matter who owns it, it's going to be the local community that drives what happens. And I think if we end up saying that, yes, we believe that, and that we can go forward with some kind of an agreement with language for legislative intent and vision, that may be the way to go, but we'll continue to talk to the state and see if we can get this wrapped up in a timely enough fashion that if we're going to move forward and they're going to move forward, that they'll be able to do the work as envisioned in the spring of next year.
In terms of pursuing the steps on annexation, is that something I should get more information on for you? It seemed like the majority of you were interested or not opposed to that idea, and that does have some length involved in it, so I need to check on how, what that schedule would be, but I at least want to, if you're at all interested, share that with you so that there is a schedule.
I think we want you to get that information.
Okay.
So that we have the option to go that way.
Okay.
Is that a fair summary? Okay. Thank you for that item. The original idea behind tonight's agenda was that we would dedicate it to the strategic plan.
The dedication starting at 10:30?
And we originally said, I originally said, we will put that on the September 7th agenda, and we won't put anything else on the September 7th.
I remember that.
And we will deal with it.
That was a good idea.
And we started chipping away at it, and we added this, and we added that, and we kept saying, well, but, we're still going to do the strategic plan, and then we kind of said, okay, we're only going to do 1/3 of it, and we'll do the other 2/3 next week. How do we want to put that on there? How much information do we want to do? Do we want to say, well, maybe we can get to the whole thing this evening? Let's not preclude that. Does anybody want to start talking about the strategic plan at 10:35?
No.
I don't think so. So I think we will, maybe we'll try and blast away whatever we can from next week's agenda, and maybe we can keep other elements of it, including our comments at the beginning, short, and maybe we can do the strategic plan next week. And if not, it will drag on and drag on. So let's see if we can make some short work of it, and anything that any of us can do in the intervening time in terms of additional perusal of the plan, comments on the plan, get them to the city clerk or to the mayor pro tem, and see if we can get those things worked out, get our brains working, and not come in here and kind of thrash around for a while. Let's just make short work of that, but effective work.
Good idea.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.